I think we're live. Good morning to everybody and welcome to the September 30th, 2023 edition of the Saturday Free School here in Philadelphia. We have a decent amount of things we're going to talk about today, but we're going to start with the Henry Winston Symposium that's happening in November, I believe, and just give an update on the organizing and then talk through some further updates on the journal that we're also launching this upcoming November, Avant-Garde, and then we'll also talk about the 2024 election and where we are in terms of that. But yeah, for the Henry Winston Symposium, I'll hand it over to Shantanu to give some updates.
Okay. So, good morning, everyone. I wanted to provide an update on the upcoming conference focusing on the man and the mind of probably the greatest communist leader in the history of America, Henry Winston. The basic underlying foundation of this conference is our belief that Winston was a scientist. He was a scientist with a scientific method as sophisticated as Einstein's. And we have been struggling really for a few weeks to find a title that would be broad enough to encompass the breadth of Winston's ideas, but also highlight his most relevant contributions for our time and the future. So we have converged in calling this conference Science and Revolution, a symposium celebrating 50 years of Henry Winston's A Strategy for a Black Agenda. This will be a two-day conference held on the 11th and 12th of November, which is the second Saturday and Sunday of the month of November. And it will be held here in Philadelphia at the First Unitarian Church. So for everybody watching, everybody is welcome to come down and attend this celebration with us. The first day, we will have a documentary screening which has been made by our dear friend Emil, which will be followed by remarks from Doc, who will talk to us about Winston, having personally known him and alongside him. Our first panel about the scientific mind of Henry Winston and his revolutionary ideas analyzed through the lens of our present crisis will be a roundtable discussion. And we sort of came to this because this formulation of the three dimensions of Winston's scientific method, the scientific rational, the black proletarian imaginary, and the revolutionary imperative is such a unique thing. It's such a unique concept that needs to be discussed and analyzed. And so we decided that this has to be a more broad discussion of how Henry Winston perceived the world with the help of this or through this formulation. And like Einstein, Winston sins against reason, or sometimes he chooses to be irrational in his thought, to go beyond the scientific in his attempt to get at the truth. And this is something that really took me a long time to understand, but I think with the help of this conference and the ideas that we're going to put forward, we're really going to understand what this is, what this black proletarian imaginary is, which stems from the life world of the black proletariat, which stems from the experiences of black people through history, through time, which shapes a kind of intuition, a creative control that does not make sense if you want to think of it through categories. But it is what really advances thought beyond the rational, and so we can formulate it. And so Winston formulates it that way. And Henry Winston lived in a time that was vastly different from the one that we live in. And we hope to discuss not only his time, but the concept of time itself. And the concept of time as a means of measuring changes in our lives, as a means of measuring the movement in our life. And all of this in the first day of the conference, it will be philosophical, our consciousness will be heightened, but it's all going to make sense because Henry Winston was rooted in something, and that something is the people, and the people are concrete. Their lives are concrete, the time that they live in is concrete. And so none of this will be abstract because everything will come back to the people and the social conditions and the social realities that they live in. And what Winston believes is that time cannot be understood as something separate from this social life, from the social lives of the people, and that movements do not happen because there is a scientific rationale or which dictates a specific time that makes them happen, but because the revolutionary imperative that lives in the people spurs them to make it time for the movements. And I'm sure that other people will have things to say about this, but this is how I made sense of it in my head. And we are living in a very, very revolutionary time period. This will lead us very naturally into our second panel, which is something we in the preschool have been talking about for a long time, which is the fourth American Revolution.
Yeah, this panel is on Sunday.
This is
Still Saturday. It's still Saturday. Yeah, I'm sorry.
So this is the fourth American Revolution and the peace industrial economy. Sorry, I get them mixed up. The fourth American Revolution and the birth of a new American people is something that the future of America deserves, and we are getting closer and closer to it every single day. There has never been a time in the past where the white workers of this country have been in complete rebellion against the ruling class and the state. And they are part of a class movement that has transcended class as a purely economic category. And white workers are probably for the first time beginning to see themselves in the black worker. And which goes to show that the Du Boisian concept of the centrality of the black proletariat in the struggle for democracy that Winston recognized is coming back into the consciousness of the people. And another thing that I've been thinking about, since the Korea conference and Nuri's presentation on civilizations, is that America is not known as a civilization in the same way that India or China is. And it is not associated with civilizational values. But this time is an opportunity for the American people to establish America as a civilization based on peace, not a civilization based on war and domination. So that is hopefully what we will discuss on day one of the conference. And then on day two, which is Sunday, we will have a panel in the morning. I forgot to mention, we also have lunch on Saturday after the documentary and Doc's remarks. But on Sunday, we're going to be talking about the first panel on Sunday. We're going to be starting a little later on Sunday, probably after Mass on Sunday. And we will be talking about, again, another something that has been in preschool conversations quite a lot which is neocolonialism. And Winston writes about this quite extensively. However, neocolonialism in Winston's time was a lot different from our time. In Winston's time, neocolonialism was on the rise. It was one of the weapons that the ruling class and the world elites were actively using to exploit the people all over the world. However, in our time, we actually see that there is a crisis. There's a crisis of neocolonialism, and the flip side of that is that there is a rise of the Afro-Asiatic world. In this crisis of neocolonialism, the ruling class is getting more and more desperate. It is trying to utilize war and whatever it can to keep control, but that is failing. There is a deep crisis, their backs are against the wall, and what we are hoping to discuss through this panel is this crisis. What are the means and methods of, in our time compared to Winston's time, of neocolonialist expansion, and how the Afro-Asiatic world, Africa, different countries of Africa and China, how they are rising. And all of this in a vacuum of a world movement. There is no world peace movement, there is no world communist movement. Henry Winston did not live in these times. It is much more difficult for revolution to happen in these times, but we're still making it happen. That is the importance of Henry Winston's thought that we have to really bring into our lives today. And when we talk about the world in the present, then we naturally need to talk about the world in the future. So we are still thinking about this, that the last panel, which will focus on the children, the youth, the US people, and the future of America, we're also planning to try and make this into a roundtable discussion, because honestly, in our Tuesday meeting that we had, Eddie pointed out that we have more questions than answers at this point, because there really are a lot of questions about our future, about our children. And we have maintained that children are the future. We have maintained that the education and well-being of the children is supposed to be prioritized. It's supposed to come at the forefront of thought. And we're going to discuss what is the future of the children of America, what is the future of the youth of America, what role do they play, what is necessary to get them to implement Winston's dialectical thought. What will get them to have purpose, what will get them to instill in themselves this revolutionary imperative. So we're going to be talking about all of this and more. We're still trying to develop a lot of the ideas, and I'm sure that the other members of our committee will have other things to say, but this is going to be something that has not been done before. This is going to be something that changes the way that we think, that other people think about the world, and about how the future is going to be shaped.
Yeah, I'd love to add to that. That was beautiful. When we were discussing the book, something that really stood out to us in the beginning was just how much the world had drastically changed since Winston's time. So this was written in 1972. King was assassinated in 1968. Neocolonialism by Kwame Nkrumah was written in 1965, and at this time, the basis for the American people to relate to each other without the divisions of race animosity was there. We could sense a common, a more shared condition and common destiny. And the colonial people were freeing themselves with political independence, developing a shared sense of Africa originating from a historical civilizational basis and a common experience from colonialism as well, and the need for unity to overcome the forces of Western domination led by the US. And really, the American people were becoming more conscious of their connection to the rest of the world. And all of this was anchored by the existence of a Soviet Union as a force for world peace and uplift for the oppression of the world. And if we were giving, I guess, just a book report, we could say that, Winston painted a picture for his time, and he was able to see that some reactionary forces were steering possibilities into unproductive and self-destructive directions, and giving us some direction out of that to a stage of democracy and hopefully ultimately socialism, which is all valuable. But we need so much more than just an image of his time, and he gave us a lot more. I would say that one did paint a picture, but it feels more like he gave us a movie because he helps us see the world in motion. We can understand change, identify this positive possibility, and attempt to realize it based off of those three modes of thought that we've been discussing, of the categorical, experimental, rational, as well as the imaginary, and then the moral imperative. And really, it's really stretching the way of thinking, really making it broad, because I think one is just a strong claim to say that we think in categories. Just even establishing that, I think, is going to be a conversation that will allow people to not just analyze and explain, but predict in the future. And it's especially when, thought of in the American people as, the existence of a black proletariat and a white proletariat. Their historical categories, we're basing a lot of Du Bois, and it's still central for today, for making sense of the possibilities. But there's been, a broadening and a movement, a dynamic at play, where the American people have become much more one. I guess we've used the word the coalition of the discontented. One way to think about it, but as Shantanu described, really as greatly exemplified by the Trump movement, the best of what they are embodying and what they need to really make onto themselves is the fruits of the Black struggle. And one of the sense of time that we get from Henry Winston and movement makes me think about, the stages of development and movement of history, which I think calls us to make a democratic leap forward, which I would say the current word that I have for it is the democratization of the ideological struggle. The ruling class's ideas are insufficient for this time. The white worker is especially conscious of itself being ruled against their wishes, and people are looking for a way out. People deserve to have a say in their future, a say in their destiny. We like to say we have something to put forward in the conversation, but nobody can do it alone. And so it is the necessity for the American people to progress and the country to progress, for the ideological struggle to be democratic. And something that I still stretch my mind to think about is, we have to think about this from, rational, categorical, experimental, but there are certain limits to that. Without it, you're not going to get very far, of course, but the limitations to purely thinking in this kind of way will not be sufficient even for this time. And you can only take that leap when there's something that you may not necessarily fully understand with your brain yet, but maybe you know with your heart, or maybe it's something you can envision, and when you're trying to find a way to get there, you have to be able to believe in it and to try to realize it. I mean, this is just my personal understanding. This imaginary, I've only begun to understand it from the, I guess, generative power of the artists to make real in some way high aspirations and worthwhile dreams. And in terms of the New American people, I mean, we've discussed a civilizational drawing upon the idea of civilization, which we don't have. The American people are very young. We've only been around, I guess, as a country for a few hundred years.
Yeah. Let's get back to the organization of the conference,
Okay.
if you don't mind, because there's some details that we gotta, if you don't, why don't you go ahead? I don't want to interrupt you,
Right.
but I think we have, because we got like 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Details of the conference would be.
Well, for instance, we got to establish that it will be here.
Mhm.
It will start on Saturday at what time?
At 10 in the morning.
At 10 in the morning. That, and we will go until what time on Saturday?
We'll go until like 4 or 5.
4 or 5. And then on Sunday, we will begin
At probably noon.
at noon, yeah, because of service.
More closer to 2. Like.
Closer to 2.
Closer to,
Okay.
Okay.
in the basement or the sanctuary.
In the sanctuary.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We will start in the room that we had the civilizational concert. And, okay, that's kind of where we, where we will be and the time frame. We're going Sunday from 2 to
6 maybe.
2 to 6, and we will have how many panels on?
We'll have 2 panels.
2 on Sunday and 1 on, or two on Saturday.
We're going to have 2 each on Saturday and
Okay.
Sunday.
That's,
And so one of the panels on each day is probably going to be a round table instead.
okay, one of the will be a round table. Now, what is the difference between, what will a round table look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, if I can add to what everyone was saying, I mean, so like what Shantanu was saying, the reason to do the first panel in terms of a round table is because I think these are ideas that are being worked out. These are new ideas, which I think we're all, we all have to, be a part of and develop. And that's why the idea of a round table where everyone has, a few people have short presentations and there is a longer discussion, where many of these questions that can be worked out. And the first round table, the one on the science of Henry Winston, it will follow Doc's presentation of the essay that we've been working on. And so the main part of that round table will be the working out, through conversation and through discussion of the main parts of this paper, of this formulation. So that's going to be the round table on the science of Henry Winston.
So the round table will be like a response to Doc's.
No, I'll just be talking about like how I knew him, because see, we're gonna have Emil's documentary. We have Winston, I think we've seen it. And then, I'll be talking a little bit, how I knew him, the kind of person he was. Maybe, I haven't thought of, the role of humility and empathy in the development of science and the development of leadership. So I'll talk, and just to give a little more flavor to his life or understanding his life. And then this, go ahead. No, because see, this first panel will be really the essence of what we're trying to do, to establish science as a fundamental part of a revolutionary process, but then to define what kind of scientist Winston was. And this is going to be a big task, a complicated task. I mean, you all could, I don't know. So that's, and so it will require something like a round table with very strong moderators. The moderators can't just be, well, I'm waiting for y'all to say something in the audience. If the audience is not stepping up and meet, the moderators have to challenge, you know what I'm saying? So it's going to be but it's going to be complicated and such and so forth. The second one on Saturday is when?
The second one is going to be on the Fourth American Revolution and the birth of the new American people.
Yeah, and this whole thing of the peace industrial complex. And
so that is going to be a panel.
That's a panel.
That's a panel. And then on the second day, on Sunday, when we're starting at 2 p.m. in the sanctuary, we're going to have another panel which will be focused on the crisis of neocolonialism and the rise of the Afro-Asiatic world.
Yes.
And then we're going to end with another roundtable discussion about the children, youth, and the future of America.
Yeah. So it is more of a symposium.
That's right.
Yeah, than a quote conference type of thing.
We will need audience participation most definitely in the roundtable discussions, especially because there are a lot of ideas that we're still trying to tease out, and especially the first roundtable, which is going to be the basis for the entire thing.
Yeah.
And also the last, which is going to be the question about the people, question about the children, question about the youth, where we will need everyone in the audience as well as the people on the panel to really discuss what is necessary to move forward for our times. So 2 days, Saturday starting at 10, going up to 5, I think, and then that will be in the basement. And then on Sunday, we're starting closer to 2. That will be in the sanctuary. And we're going to go till...
We should leave at 8, so we have it even up until 7 if necessary. The conversation gets that good.
All right. Okay. So we have the place till 8, so we can go for long.
Yeah. Now, the church is charging us $1,000 for the 2 days, which is reasonable, I think. So we have to, set up a GoFundMe and raise money. We have to begin, to mobilize, of course, through the mechanisms of the internet and blase, all of that, social media. But we probably are going to have, and we should try to leaflet and get people. Now, I think it is almost confirmed that Todd Doherty and them are coming from New Mexico. He said, he texted or messaged me, what do I think of, what's his name, the Center for Political Innovation? Maupin. He asked me, well, would you want him to come? I said, definitely, yeah. And then, of course, the people from Midwest Marks. Now, I think one of the things we should do is to make it available to people who can't be here physically. So we have to have some kind of internet, some kind of chat, some kind of way that people can not only write in chat, but can also speak.
Right.
We'll see, and that'll be very important, I think. The other thing is that Todd and those are republishing Strategy for a Black Agenda, and they should have that done by November. I think part of it is they're waiting on this, the foreword that I wrote, and also Serafina doing the cover art. So that'll be happening. I'm just thinking.
Yeah, I think we forgot to mention one thing, that on the first day we'll also be launching the Avant-Garde magazine.
Ah, yes, oh God, I could forget. That Avant-Garde will be launched on the first day. And we could talk more about that. So,
You gonna have any avant-garde music?
well, definitely, okay. But yeah, we will launch Avant-Garde, just a couple of organizational details. Okay, we got about 6 weeks, which is about 42 days, is that it?
Yeah.
So we have to, every day counts. I think the audience for what we're going to do, I would hope that our audience is essentially young people. I think that we should not be put off if, you know, there is, how can I put it? You know, activism and what are called politics, radical politics, are infused with anti-intellectualism.
Yeah.
Deep anti-intellectualism. And then a lot of, and I talked to Sarah, I talked to Samir about this, all other people, a kind of a resentment and competitiveness with the free school.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? That, I mean, and that's a real. And all the forces that are producing this, we don't know and we don't have to talk about right now. But it is an unnatural kind of, I feel, competition with free school. It doesn't make sense. But it's there. So we have to work hard to build our audience, and the potential audience is out there. And I think the Lotus reading of Baldwin kind of shows something very important, that young people are looking for ideas. That's not all young people, but and we can build our own constituency as we've always had to do. So what did, Shantanu, what did we say our budget? We approximated our budget at what?
So we put the high end to be $2,500. And I think that everything will be covered and more in that.
And that includes rental,
Lunch and
And the performance, if we have any.
if we have
we have
performance.
performances.
Yes, and we was, oh, good.
Yeah, that's and if we wanted, like, we're still discussing whether we wanted to print out the first issue of Avant-Garde and have it at the event itself.
Yes, that's, we have to talk with Jerry and Michelle about that,
Yeah.
yeah. Mhm.
We would probably need a more accurate number of pages and how many booklets to make and things. I think it would be good, but it depends on the budget and everything.
Yes. Mhm.
I did some calculations, it's currently not in the budget, but we can make it.
Okay. I mean, if we have just the rent and the lunch, and the performances, I'm guessing that we'll squeeze, we'll try and see what can happen. We won't have t-shirts this time, so if we don't have t-shirts and we have these pamphlets at the event instead, I think that would be good.
Yeah, for the journal, like we've been talking about it a little bit in terms of what could be printed for the event, and yeah, I think there are many different options of what we could do. Like obviously one of them would be printing the entire first issue, but that's very, very cost heavy, and I think would add like a significant amount to the budget if this is incorporated into the event budget. So in lieu of that, there are also other options, including like we could print like promotional material to even just get people to know that the journal is online, like where they can find articles, that kind of thing, which would be probably like the most cost-effective way of promoting the journal. Another option is we could consider like printing like docs, for instance, essay on Winston, like just that one, to kind of give people a taste also of like what the journal will be producing, the kinds of thinking that people could expect from Avant-Garde. But yeah, there are many different options. I feel like printing an entire first issue though is like it's a very big endeavor, both planning wise and execution wise, but also financially. So we want to be, I think, conscious of that too.
Okay. So we could work that in, and I think the two go so naturally together.
Right.
A symposium on science and revolution, and they do go together, and science is not a bad word as the postmodernists and the race theorists and the feminists and all of that. Science is not a bad word, and it is indispensable for the type of change that the American people are calling for. And I'm building on what Eddie was just saying. There is no two ways about it. And to frankly understand more profoundly, more deeply, what we mean when we talk about a fourth American Revolution. All of this that we talk about and concepts that we think about and think through have to be grounded in scientific and really mature thinking. And I think the other thing that the whole thing is very optimistic, including ending with youth and children. And pedagogy, and what can children and youth know, and how do we infuse science into their lives, and yada, 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 yada. But I think we can pull it off.
I think I like this idea though. I like the idea of printing one or two articles and then saying that, okay, you can find the rest here.
Yeah.
Maybe that would be more cost effective.
I do. And I don't think there's anything wrong with an online journal.
Yeah.
I mean, most journals are online these days.
I mean, the journal will have a long life ahead of it, and so we can also, in the future, we can consider more like physical manifestations.
Yes. So, we meet every Tuesday. We have to work out these details of the GoFundMe. We need to start that as soon, and how we're going to promote it, how we're going to advertise it, and who are our audiences, and how do we mobilize? Because all of this is a matter of mobilizing people, encouraging people to come. And, another thing, in terms, of a lot of working class people, they think that all of this is beyond them. And I disagree so much. And I think what I hope you all find acceptable in this paper is that here you had Henry Winston. He is an example of that kind of intellectual and scientist who emerges from the ordinary people. And if he could become this, then that possibility exists more widely. You don't have to go to a university to be a smart person, to be an intelligent, revolutionary person. And all that's in the zeitgeist of activism that is really, I think when you look at, is a put down of the ordinary person.
Right.
The way they conduct themselves, in fact.
Oh no, I just wanted to add, I think even in terms of like why organize a symposium such as this, like what is the intent behind it and what does it hope to achieve? I mean, in the science reading group, we've been talking a lot about Einstein, and Yeah, I really like, there's this quote from Einstein in this essay called Physics and Reality, where he says, all that science is essentially the refinement of everyday thinking.
Yeah.
And then there's also, you know, Didi Kosambi, who kind of frames science as the cognition of necessity, whereas, you know, freedom is framed as the recognition, right? The recognition of necessity. And I feel like part of our assessment of the current moment right now as part of the free school is that what the American people think and the way that they think has never been more important. Because it's like, I also see us in some ways building on the legacy of something like the civil rights movement, but there's like a particular way of engaging in struggle, which I think it's almost like we're trying to build on that tradition with these kinds of symposia. But part of it's almost like the kernel of the crisis, as we've said many times in free school, is the crisis of the legitimacy of the ruling class, right? And what that poses to the people is that it is the ideology of the ruling elite, which is so distant from the people, but also what they're actively rejecting. And the question is then, well, then what comes after? What comes actually to overcome that ideology? And so in a lot of ways, it's like almost like the way that Eddie said it, part of what we're doing in free school is to make democratic the struggle of ideas. To bring not just, but in a way where we're not just like, you know, creating like an open forum where people can just kind of be engaged in like an endless debate society. You know, that's not the point. It's like we come with a very concrete set of ideas, our own ideas, building on the way of like almost like the mode of thinking that someone like Henry Winston exemplifies. And part of what we're saying is that, well, one, we are investigating not just the way that Henry Winston thought, but we are investigating the way that the American people think and can think in order to resolve this crisis on their own terms. And I feel like in that sense, it's like why we're doing this is not just because like we want to celebrate like an anniversary just for an arbitrary reason, but because it gives an opportunity for not just us, but for people like the people in Philadelphia, young people, all kinds of people, to actually engage in that process of struggling for new ideas together. And in that sense, yeah, like I'm very excited about it because, yeah, like I don't know, the discussions on science have been very like really interesting to me over the past couple of weeks, and I feel like for us, it's just we want to create a space in which the way that people think can kind of naturally come together and unfold and actually, you know, establish also greater unity amongst people in that way. Because I just feel like, yeah, like it's almost like the question of thought, like the question of ideas, like they assume a central importance in this time because of basically like the ideological crisis of American society in the way that it begs for basically like new ways of thinking, which is also, you know, like what avant-garde is aspiring to capture and to advance in a lot of ways. But yeah.
Yeah, I hear you, Jeremiah, and I feel like one of the methods, I guess, that we're trying to like do something like that, and when you said that you're thinking of the American people and what's on your mind is so important, is in kind of giving this way that like Henry Winston thinks, like the moral revolutionary imperative, what you call it, the science of the yeah, but I guess to say right now is like a time where like the question of like the American civilization is on the table. So I guess to say that like in a way to give like the thinking of Black proletarian imaginary, I guess, to America, because that is something that like comes out of America. So like setting to the task of how do we make this into like a modern, something modern to like take us forward, right? You know, I think that in history, because even the question of what is that is kind of difficult to answer, but you know, if you go to history, you can see like, you know, things that have been created, like the Sorrow Song, you can see, this great organization after a struggle for reconstruction, education, democracy, things like that, peace. So in a way, letting that, bringing that, I guess, back into the consciousness of people, and to say that like it's capable for people to think in this way. And I guess we're seeing that more and more too, as people break away from all the assumptions, because I guess, America
The heightened capacity of the people. Yeah.
I guess to propose in a way like a challenge, and something like that.
I like the way you said that science is the refinement of everyday thinking. I haven't thought about
Science.
and especially when you frame it as people treat other normal people as if they're incapable of advanced thinking, and people might have been taught to be averse to, let's say, abstract thinking or things of that nature. But really, I view it as you want to make something general or part of a greater whole, as opposed to like your experience is just itself, like all your experience is part of a greater whole and is connected to other people, and you can think about it in totality, and then really it's one side of like a greater part, and that can be called abstract thinking in some ways, but I think it's still grounded in life, and I'm not saying it's trivial. It can be hard, but it's not anything that's above our capabilities. And then in a kind of format where we have such a rich discussion in a roundtable, that greater whole that we have to conceptualize can, I guess, using Hegel's words, greater ascent to the concrete by connecting it back to our original experiences. So I'm very excited about the roundtable. I hope everyone is almost aggressive in trying to participate.
If you don't mind, Shantanu, can I read this? This, I have to tell you guys, has been a vocation of agony writing this, because it is an attempt to give foundation and grounding to what we're trying to think through about this. So, it's a little too long. Forgive me. It's entitled Science, the Black Proletariat and Revolution, celebrating the 50th anniversary of Henry Winston's Strategy for a Black Agenda. This essay celebrates the 50th anniversary of the publication of Henry Winston's Strategy for a Black Agenda, a critique of new theories of liberation in the United States and Africa, a classic in the scientific investigation of the Black and working class struggles in the United States. Along with its companion work, Race, Class, and Black Liberation, we have the core of his scientific work. Winston writes as a committed Marxist-Leninist and chairman of the Communist Party of the United States. For him, Marxism-Leninism was a science of sciences, in a similar way to the way Hegel saw philosophy as a science of sciences. Therefore, this tribute is more than a 50th anniversary celebration of strategy. It is, in the end, an investigation of the intellect and scientific mind that produced it. Strategy is a work of creative Marxism. It is grounded in the works of Marx, Lenin, and the scientific discoveries of W.E.B. Du Bois. I explore Winston's scientific method both through Winston's writing and my almost 15 years working very closely with him. It is his working out complicated questions of philosophical method, the relationship between the general theoretic and the concrete and specific, and how theory and practice interconnect, and how all of this is paramount to understanding the world. For him, making science practical and applying it to the struggles of working people and oppressed groups gives it a human and revolutionary essence. For him, connecting science to the struggle of working people would help build unity among them. In the end, this is a first attempt to probe the deep structures of Winston's mind. Winston was an exceptional figure in the revolutionary and communist history of the United States. He was also an important figure in the world communist, anti-colonial, and peace movements. He was a scientist imbued with a unique proletarian imagination. His commitment to materialism and dialectics was joined to his life world. Being brought up under Jim Crow laws and the sharecropping economy produced an imaginary that connected his life to the Black proletariat, producing what I'm calling a Black proletarian imaginary. This Black proletariat imaginary anchored and enriched the scientific apparatus that informed his engagement with the objective world. This imaginary drove his quest to know the world and increasingly drove him to Marxism-Leninism. As such, his mind ultimately sought to know the world and how to change it through knowledge, engaging regions of thought, which included epistemology, ideology, dialectical logic, political science, and sociology. He rejected the dogmatism inherent to pure abstract thinking and the general and nebulous phrases that accompany it. He was predisposed to a creativity and intuitiveness similar to what might be found in musicians like Thelonious Monk or John Coltrane, or writers like James Baldwin, or artists like Buford Delaney, Barbara Bullock, and Serafina Harris. Winston was born in 1911 in Hattiesburg in the Black Belt of Mississippi. Mississippi was the poorest and most repressive state in the nation. He grew up around former slaves. The scourge of racial terror visited his family as an uncle was lynched. He knew suffocating poverty that was so intense he breathed, smelled, and literally tasted it. He felt it in his bones. The Great Depression of the 1930s only deepened an already intense situation produced by the super exploitation of the Black proletariat. His family moved to Kansas City, Missouri, seeking to escape these harsh conditions. The Great Depression was catastrophic for Black folk and the entire working class. He joined the unemployed councils in Missouri, side by side with youth who were in a similar situation to his and who wished to change the world through struggle. He sought to figure out what produced this economic depression. He met members of the Young Communist League, where he began to discuss why the capitalist system worldwide had collapsed and what was the future for young people and whether there was a future under capitalism. He, along with his friends, concluded there was not. He joined the Young Communist League and quickly rose to become its organizational secretary. He fought in World War II against fascism and for democracy and to defend the Soviet Union. He was arrested after World War II under the Smith Act and served 6 of an 8-year sentence in Terre Haute Federal Penitentiary. Because of intentional prison neglect, he lost his sight in prison. Emerging from prison in 1961, he proclaimed he had lost his sight, but not his vision. This was his declaration that he would continue to fight for democracy, peace, and socialism. However, he resumed his leadership of the Communist Party at the moment when the Black freedom movement was reshaping the nation. A third American Revolution was underway. Strategy for a Black Agenda is a defense of this revolution and its main leaders, in particular Martin Luther King. Subsection, science is indispensable to struggle. science's indispensability to struggle. Understanding that Winston sought to discover the truth scientifically helps to locate his theorizing and how he lays the groundwork for a larger yet incomplete theory of the specifics of the US class, democratic, and anti-racist struggles. His work elevates the theory of revolutionary change to more complex and at the same time more concrete levels. In Winston's work, rather than empty theory which predisposes thought to dogmatism, we have a movement to the concrete and the actual. As such, his work seeks to achieve greater understanding of working people and the class struggle. His work focuses upon the emerging concrete, the new, and seeks out revolutionary possibilities inherent to the new. For Winston, science was indispensable to revolutionary theory and change. He referred regularly to Marxism, Leninism. If I repeat myself, be patient with me. As revolutionary science. For him, the foundation of Marxism, Leninism was dialectical materialism, and thus it was the core of Winston's approach to knowing the world. He viewed it, moreover, as a method that generalized the achievements of natural and social science. He viewed science as more than an observational enterprise, but as an active engagement with the world, active in two ways. First, the connections to the actions and agencies of working people and the racially and nationally oppressed, but also in the constant development of and generalization upon the most advanced discoveries of knowledge. Winston situated his approach to the relationship between science and the objective world in the words of Frederick Engels. Freedom is the recognition of necessity. In other words, freedom is anchored to an understanding of the law-like movement of history and society. The engine of the patterns of social and historical movement is contradiction, which are inherent in all things. This is, moreover, a recognition that the material world is the foundation of unity and interconnection of all things. However, the mode of the existence of the world is dialectical, which is to say, all things, including human socio-historical relationships and human consciousness, exist in a constant state of movement and development. These interconnections and these developments, these laws, are what he tirelessly sought to understand. As example of this is how he went about explaining the dual yet interconnected systems of capitalist exploitation and racial oppression. To illustrate their unity, he references Marx and Frederick Douglass during the anti-slavery struggle and Lenin and Du Bois during the state monopoly imperialist stages of capitalism. Each, Winston argued, pursued scientific approaches based upon materialism. For him, understanding the interconnectedness of these thinkers is a way to explain the interconnection of the systems of exploitation of labor and the racist system. Together they make up the capitalist mode of production. These unusual combinations, capitalist exploitation and racial oppression, show how he sought to advance science beyond the coffins of dogma. In acknowledging the dual systems, Winston logically asserted and theoretically justified the centrality of the struggle for Black liberation to the class struggle and the struggle for democracy and socialism. The concept of centrality of Black liberation is important and an advancement upon revolutionary social science. He sees a special role for Black folk in the development of capitalism in the US and to the liberation of the working class from exploitation. Yet more specifically, he viewed the centrality to ultimately be the centrality of the Black proletariat. However, the centrality of the Black proletariat operated as an objective gravitational pull, attracting the white and Black workers towards one another. That which interrupts this mutual pull of gravity is ideology and consciousness. Whether white workers can see their inevitable connection with black workers is the question. At another level, it is apparent the general theory of capitalist development, as reflected in Marx's Das Kapital and Lenin's Imperialism, the high stage of capitalism, and Du Bois and Douglas, who manifested the special or specific theory of capitalist development in the context of the United States. The special theory gives anchorage and application and concreteness to the general theory. In this regard, we see in the thinking of Winston what Marx called ascending or rising to the concrete. In the end, Winston saw this centrality as a law of the development of the specific or concrete forms of the class struggle in the U.S.
Sorry about that.
So not, excuse me.
Sorry about that.
Okay. Though not stated in his work, it seems that its logic suggests that in the throes of the systemic mixture of race and class, there was emerging not just an oppressed racial and national group, but a civilization in potentiality. This civilization of working people could become the basis of a new American civilization of freedom and peace composed of the working people. The music, art, philosophical, and religious developments all pointed to what Du Bois called a civilization in potentiality. Subsection, the trialectics of science, the Black proletariat, and revolution. Winston agreed. He agreed with Frederick Engels, I'm just saying. In other words, science is not confined to observation, but is a creative and messy enterprise that seeks the truth. Yet science must, he reasoned, recognize the laws of motion of reality. This acknowledgement liberates science from static dogma and pure abstraction. Winston, moreover, sought to apply science to the day-to-day issues of tactics and strategies, always connecting it to the struggle for unity against the monopoly capitalist class and their ideology. Winston's practice and method of science and theory is organized within a dialectical triad composed of three aspects. First, the scientific, rational, and empirical. Second, the Black proletariat, imaginary, and intuition. And third, the revolutionary and moral imperatives. Subsection, the scientific, rational dimension. Arguing that the revolutionary process must be connected to a scientific outlook, which must grasp the logic and trajectory of history and society, including it in its concrete forms. The rational dimension of thought is critical. This dimension operates through reason, setting boundaries such as space and time, the material character of the world, and dialectical logic. Winston appropriates the philosophical conclusions of Marx and Lenin. He rejects the positivist construction of science and the pragmatist rejection of science as a method to achieve the truth. The Black proletarian imaginary. There, however, is a second, and as it turns out, a significant dimension, the imaginary and intuitive. It sometimes appears to be, and perhaps is, the opposite to science, the scientific and rational. It is non-rational, and is the artistic and imaginative dimension of knowing and discovery. It produces leaps in theory, challenging previous theoretical formulations with new, often novel insights. These leaps can come off as eruptions and disruptions of normal assumptions. They are produced by taking epistemic stances far removed from normal thinking. It is like going to the margins of thought and science to come up with new theoretical syntheses to explain new conditions. Albert Einstein understood the intuitive as essential to new insights and new knowledge. He insisted that, quote, without sinning against reason, we could never arrive at any conclusions. In Einstein's debate with theorists of quantum physics, he said what they lacked, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What they lacked was an imaginary and intuition. In Winston's case, the Black proletariat imaginary is driven by the necessity to understand the concrete realities of Black folk and the Black proletariat, and hence the urge to rise to levels of concrete knowledge. An example is Du Bois's discovery of the Black proletariat as a social and historically constituted class category, different from yet not separated from the working class as a whole. When he wrote Black Reconstruction in America, the idea of the Black proletariat as a proletariat, albeit enslaved, shattered most images of the working class and the past of the class struggle. Seeking to apply theories to new stages in social development and to new ideological challenges, Du Bois discovers a new social category, the Black proletariat, that explained both the concrete complexities of the class struggle in the US and developed radical theorizing concerning revolutionary change. Also, Du Bois introduced racial oppression as necessary to understanding the capitalist mode of production. Du Bois's thinking carried tremendous weight for Winston. Based upon it, he could see the central role of the Black proletariat, For Du Bois to arrive at this new understanding of the working class in the US and the nature of the struggle for democracy and radical change meant going beyond scientific and rational constructions and imagining a new category. This was an imaginative and intuitive leap on Du Bois's part that in the end advanced scientific knowledge. Winston's deployment of the Black proletariat imaginary. Winston's scientific practices, his critiques of new and older theories, in the process discovered new dynamics of the democratic and class struggle. This is not special to Du Bois or Winston. And then I say Albert Einstein did the same thing, but I'd said that before. Winston, in essence, bends Marxist categories, deploying Du Bois's scientific categories and empirical studies to achieve a new scientific synthesis, which is necessary for understanding concrete US history. In particular, it is necessary to explain the special oppression of Black people, the special super exploitation of Black labor, and how all of this fits into the struggle against United States imperialism. The extraordinary thing about Winston's method is the imaginary is organic to who he was. Mm-hmm. He bends science to a special empathy for working people and their suffering. This imagination arises from the life world of the Black proletariat and slavery. Winston knew this world and found in it a source of knowledge and creativity. Winston's Black proletarian imaginary unsettles and challenges the world of knowledge and many Marxist assumptions. This is the existential and lived world dimension of scientific practice. Winston, being a black man, a person who grew up in the shadow of slavery under conditions of inhuman poverty and degradation, seeing unimaginable suffering, frames the human essence of his approach to knowledge and science. In other words, the totality of knowledge and his approach to theory, philosophy, and science are filtered through his black proletarian life world. This life experience, part of the deep structure of his mind and thinking, became the imaginative and intuitive filter through which he knew the world. It must be emphasized that this gave to his thinking a creativity and an urge to understand concrete social reality in creative ways. We discover in Winston the fact that the black proletarian imaginary is necessary and indispensable part of revolutionary science, and what I'm trying to get at, if nowhere else in the world, this is indispensable for social scientific understanding of American history, this imaginary. The black proletarian imaginary enriches the life world of science and equips it with an existential and phenomenological dimension not present in the rational and normal scientific. Ultimately, this more holistic approach to scientific knowledge forces it away from positivism and dogmatism. This dimension unsettles purely rational construals of science. It upsets what is believed to be normal, yet when properly deployed, produces the possibility of new knowledge. We witness this creativity in the works, as I said before, Thelonious Monk and John Coltrane, the writings of James Baldwin, the artistic works of Buford Delaney, Jacob Lawrence, Barbara Bullock, or Serafina Harris. Winston and the revolutionary and moral imperative. The third dimension is the revolutionary moral imperatives as part of scientific knowledge. That higher purpose of science for Winston is revolutionary change, which compels the science away from the scientist, away from the status quo, towards the moral imperative to act, and not for one's own interest, but in the interest of humanity. Moreover, the revolutionary is not merely bound to theory, science, and philosophy in order to know the world, but to a revolutionary and moral imperative to change the world, to transform it, and bring into being a new world. The black proletariat imaginary, along with the revolutionary and moral imperatives, further pushes science and the rational towards the purpose for which science and knowledge must exist, humanity. Time, history, and the Black Proletarian Agency. I want to thank Blaze for his post on Facebook. Finally, a word about history. It cannot be said enough. Du Bois's Black Reconstruction is a great and transgressive historical work designed as a study of socio-historical time. Time is a measure of movement. Historical time is a measure of the velocity of social and historical change, rooted in the struggle of human beings. In this respect, it can be viewed as a measure of the maturity of human agency and consciousness. It, in essence, measures movement. Time is concrete and therefore embedded in human social relationships. Understanding time in this concrete ways informs our and Winston's understanding of the geography of struggle and what are appropriate strategies and tactics. In a nuanced critique of Huey P. Newton, understanding of the relationship of time to revolutionary tactics, Winston introduces a scientific understanding of time and revolutionary agency. With Newton and Winston, we have opposing theories of time. tactics, and when the people will be ready for revolutionary action. Winston says that Newton's idea that certain tactics have to await the future or the right time is a way of saying we must passively wait for time, which is to say that time is disconnected from actual material relations of classes and oppressed groups. For Winston, time is part of the material world and thus a part of human relationships. Thus, the actions of human beings and of classes determine social time. Humans can both make time through their actions, and we can know time through scientific observation. Human social relations have time embedded in them, yet human agency determines time, especially its velocity, its speed. At the end, Winston concludes that Newton's notion of time and the future time of revolutionary action is rooted in a fantasy, a fiction about when and how to act, leading to the justification of political passivity and forms of black capitalism in the now time, in the name of waiting for a revolutionary time for revolutionary action. For Winston, this is a distorted understanding of current time and the future. Subsection: Neocolonialism and the scientific understanding of imperialism. Africa, for Winston, is central to explaining the modern world, both the rise of capitalism as a system and the imperialist or general crisis stage of capitalism. Hence, in the imperialist stage and after independence for most African nations in the 1960s, neocolonialism plays a strategic function in the consolidation of capitalism as a world system. He recognized the fundamental role of Africa's national liberation struggles to the class and anti-racist struggles in the United States. That the US working class and the black proletariat in particular could move forward to the extent that they politically understood Africa's positioning in the world. This understanding elevates class consciousness among US workers to anti-imperialist and anti-racist consciousness, a high level of political and ideological clarity. However, imperialism is reproduced to the extent that the labor and mineral wealth of Africa remains in the grip of the West. In other words, there's hardly an anti-imperialist struggle that is not equally a struggle against neocolonialism in Africa. Winston concludes that Maoism, the political and theoretical ideas of Mao Zedong, leader of the Chinese Revolution, and Neo-Pan-Africanism, a capturing of the Pan-African movement for aims completely different from Du Bois's, ideologically and politically operate to justify and uphold neocolonialism. Maoism and Neo-Pan-Africanism, by claiming that the Soviet Union, a vital ally to African nations and liberation movements, was an imperialist nation and thus anti-African, provided ideological aid and comfort to actual imperialist nations and to their system of neocolonialism, which was fortified by financial, economic, political, and military institutions of the West. He notes that Maoism and Neo-Pan-Africanism deploy what he calls a skin strategy, a strategy which says allies and enemies are defined by their skin color. Skin strategy thinking and analysis, rather than undermining neocolonialism and imperialism and imperialism, fortifies it and reinscribes the color line on a world scale. Winston insists Maoism and Pan-Africanism were enemies of the oppressed. Du Bois, Lenin's synthesis, a new region of science. An extraordinary part of Winston's theorizing was his suggestion that Lenin and Du Bois thought along parallel lines. Winston, in a sense, opens up a new region of thought, a possible Du Bois-Lenin synthesis, which links the categories and assumptions of Du Bois's work with Lenin's. This synthesis creates a new I need to edit, creates a new region of scientific thought. It joins in unique ways the more general scientific achievements of Lenin and Marx as theorizing with the special theories and categories discovered by Du Bois, especially concerning the class struggle and the class-race dialectic in the US. However, Du Bois foresaw a new Afro-Asiatic world configuration, replacing the imperialist alliance based on Western domination. Du Bois saw a large revolutionary role in the movement to communism of Asian and African civilizations. This new region of thought, though not fully developed in Winston's work, is part of the free school philosophy of Black liberation's theoretical work. Du Bois thought anew about communism and located its immediate possibilities in Asia. The rise of Asia and Africa would occur in the context of the crisis of the West, especially in the United States, and the consequent crisis of neo-colonialism. The prerequisites for communism were, Du Bois theorized, more readily grounded in the values of ancient Asian civilizations, especially ones that had socialist revolutions and established the democratic dictatorship of the proletariat. Du Bois thought creatively about questions such as forms of state power, including the dictatorship of the proletariat and the state of the entire people, and what is today called the civilization state. He thought in new, unprecedented ways about a new type of communism, quote as he said, a different kind of communism, based on a new way of thinking and forms of state power and people's democracy rooted in Asian civilizational values. He creatively synthesized several modalities of social, scientific, philosophical, and historical investigation, comparing civilizations and their possibilities to achieve communism. These interrogations have meaning in the 21st century, a century where Asia will overtake the West and Africa will not be far behind, when the US is confronted with domestic political instability and a rising crisis of government and bourgeois class rule. Du Bois's conclusions concerning communism reflected his characteristic optimism in spite of the Cold War domestic police state repression, and even as he was being indicted as an agent of a foreign nation. Winston looked increasingly to the East and Africa, the so-called global South, to carry the weight of humanity in toppling Western and US imperialism. Henry Winston in the now time. This moment in history is very different from the moment in which Henry Winston produced Strategy for a Black Agenda and other works. The crisis of the West and the US ruling elites are existential, making the elite unable to rule in the old ways domestically or internationally. That having been said, Winston's work and his method of thought carry significance for this time. Especially important is his commitment to science as indispensable to revolutionary change. The example of his scientific practice, which joins three levels of thinking: the rational, the Black proletarian imaginary, and the revolutionary imperative. His rethinking science and how it is done. His method that rejects positivism as a way to do science are all important as we go forward. Winston showing that strategy and tactics of struggle demands scientific analyses of the objective world, and that the objective of science and strategy and tactics is freedom of working people from exploitation and all forms of oppression. Winston's commitment was to unite working people and all of the peace, democratic, and socialist forces on a world scale. Because he was a scientist and a revolutionary, It is because he was a scientist and a revolutionary that we celebrate his strategy for a Black agenda. Hold it, no, it was this is, as our people struggle to make and secure their future, Winston is also important. His message for children and youth is there is a sky, there is a future worth fighting for. Tomorrow is today. What must be will be decided now. We must recognize the fierce urgency of now, which means we must struggle hard to know the world and learn methods of scientific and research analysis that help us know it. Because he was a scientist, we celebrate him and the publication of Strategy for Black Agenda. Still, I need to know how to edit Michelle. My task was, I was assigned the task of kind of summarizing, laying a philosophical, theoretical basis for us going forward.
I think it was good. One thing I would add is that instead of saying like necessarily that, because it is a black, black whatever, but kind of get into the, you talked about the, and one of the points we talked about during the 70s and 80s, how there was a connection to Africa.
Yes.
An example you could use is the, Munch used to talk about the strike, or you when you first started, the strikes, that had longshoremen. You would say you worked there for a year, so maybe kind of talking about that experience during that time, because that's a natural connection, because it's like Lucien Bell or Lucien Ball, whatever the name. But it's kind of like if you get into that, like the experience and the concrete, Rosen talked about concrete. Concrete thinking, that is. And so if you kind of get into the nature, the nature of what was happening during that time. So I'm sure that was really, excuse my French, a hell of an experience.
Yeah. And in fact, to tell you the truth, Jay, that is what will be teased out in the panel.
Okay.
Exactly. No, for the conference, for the symposium.
Okay.
That's definitely that concreteness.
I'm really excited about the progression of watching a movie about Henry Winston's life and making all of these things very real, anchored in this broad framework of thinking. I think it's going to be very rich, and especially reading this right now, I think it's a modern and futuristic outlook that I think people are going to be really hungry for. With the elections I think people start asking a lot of questions. People start evaluating their lives, and really to even just understand this moment in time, I think we need to look back, starting in Winston's time, because I think that's when the present order was set in motion.
I think you're right.
And and now that it's falling apart, if you only look at what's going on right now, you're not gonna fully understand. And to even have a way out, I think you need the science, the threefold science that is validated by explaining the past and the present to make a movement to the future. So I really hope that with that.
And that's where I really have to work more. You see, there was that, and that uniqueness thing, because here's a man that grew up in the worst conditions imaginable. I mean, that poverty in Mississippi and lynchings and all of that, you know, that becomes a part of him, not just his thinking, a part of him. And you know, and so when he, see, Marxism, Leninism, or science, or any of this means something very different to him than to a person that didn't experience that. And he made, and I'm not making it clear enough, you know, that what he did and what he saw, and he saw Lenin in a way that other people didn't. But then he was seeing Lenin, and Michelle, I gotta put this in, he was looking at Lenin through Du Bois, which was transgressive already. I didn't get that in there. To look at Lenin through Du Bois rather than Du Bois through Lenin. Huge transgressive move, which made him appear to be a, quote, revisionist and hard to, quote, hard to understand as it were. And I think this symposium will be the first time that Henry Winston is treated as a scientific thinker. Yeah, but what is science? Science, you know, I'm sorry.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. And I like the way you put it, you know, growing up in Mississippi, at that time period, thrown into a depth of crisis then, I guess, America's living a crisis after crisis.
And this is another thing. You know, a lot of people went to jail under the Smith Act, but nobody was blinded in prison, but one guy. And, you know, you're in your 40s or 50s, and your sight is taken away. Then what do? And he says, I lost my sight, but not my vision. You know, the struggle continues. It's just so much, and I don't get it all. That's what I'm struck to convey, that suffering personally made him empathetic to suffering generally. And that the science of revolutionary change had to have an empathy with those who suffer. You know what I'm saying? And this is, and I'm talking too much, this is vastly different from this, you know, thing that we have today, where people, I'm discriminated against, you know, this current victimology thing. He's talking about a deep suffering. You know what I'm saying? And that's what I'm trying to get. And he was not a cat that was trying to seek anybody else's approval. He was trying to create something new. And he knew that it was necessary to create new science and new theory if there were to be a unity of the people to bring about revolutionary change in this country. Not in France, not in Germany, not even in China or India, but here. Go ahead.
I want to ask, what year was he born?
He was born in 1911.
Okay, now, you know what's very significant. Now, my father was born in 1913.
Yeah.
Okay, and he didn't leave the South until he was 19. I bought this big, thick, oversized book that has over 200 pictures of black lynchings. And I'm going through the book, and they tell you, and give you dates, and I'm even going through it. They tell you where it was, you know, and you see all the white people looking up and like they're, you know, and all this kind of thing. And I'm going all through here. Then I come to a lynching that was right in the area that my father lived in. And during the time that when he was there, and I was able to understand what he went through that he never talked about. man, through his experience, gave a voice, not only a voice, but he used scientific methodology to understand and came up with concepts for it. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And our elders had good intentions for not telling the details of all of that, but it was a major mistake because what they should have did was like the Jews and telling the exact nature of it over and over again,
Right.
so that we understand that.
Exactly.
And he never mentioned a word. So this is the horror that Black people are walking around with. And I speak dramatically, but I'm not angry. I want everybody to know that.
Right.
But I'm just saying, whoa.
Yeah.
So, that's all I
See, and what I'm trying to establish, and I don't know what I did adequately, that there is no science of revolutionary change without that Black proletarian imaginary. And that Black proletarian imaginary fuels a level of consciousness seen nowhere else in the society or in the working class, which then translates into the Black proletariat as central, but in the vanguard of the entire working class. It's consciousness. You know what I'm saying? And Winston, and I got, we'll work it out, even in this panels and stuff, and he didn't talk about himself and his own suffering, what he had seen a lot, but he would talk about precisely what you said, through not talking about himself, but talking about Black folk. That was always Black folk. You'd always Black folk, and he would always impress upon party members, upon general public, Black folk. Just like Du Bois, Black folk. And so then, his move to Africa, this understanding of neo-colonialism and the struggle against it, and how it must impact the struggle in this country. You know what I'm saying? Was huge. And these formulations, and I gotta find it, you don't find it anywhere else in the world communist movement. So then you would get all of these leaders of African liberation movements flocking to him. I'm talking about like the Amilcar Cabrals, the O.R. Tombos of the ANC, and all of these leaders, they saw in him not only a communist, but a man of deep empathy. And that made you can claim anything, you can say anything, but people judge you by what they feel from you. And it was that life world combined with science and Marxism and dialectics and the whole nine that made him this special figure. And he saw what few others in the Communist Party or in the left movement saw. And even though, I'll just say as a younger person, I could not articulate what I've said now. We all knew that he understood us in special ways. He was empathetic. I mean, it was unbelievable, but it related back to his own life world and experience. But then it related to, you had to put those other elements in the scientific, rational, and the revolution. And you put that together, you're looking at somebody that's saying, it's like a John Coltrane. It's like, it's that. It's like, Baldwin. But it's they represent that same thing, that imaginary, that intuitiveness, but see, it's coming from a life, a life. You know what I'm saying? When you see your uncle lynched, you living around people that were slaves, and then, and you don't catch nothing but a heartbreak, that depression hits. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
That's what I'm trying to say. And I'm not making, that was him, really. I just don't have the words to put it right completely. But that's what I was trying to get at.
Imaginary or not analogy?
Yeah, well, I wanted to get back to different parts of what you were saying. I think it's really becoming clear as we talk about it more. But this question of how you say science as science as messy, and the objective of science being to rise to the concrete.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about it because I think this this is a complicated argument, and because on the one hand we are talking about the inner harmony in science, and the struggle to find the inner harmony in science, and at the same time we are talking about rising against the concrete, rising to the concrete, which can be a messy enterprise. And I think from your what you were reading out from your essay, I think it really comes out that Winston saw this as the aim of science, and in order for science to reach that aim at every stage, at every revolutionary stage, there is a break in the logic, and it's a movement towards a new logic that Winston is constantly talking about. I was thinking about how he talks about the idea of a strategic breakthrough, and he says, he talks about the idea that at every point in the history of the US, the goal of capitalism has always been fascism, and he talks about the need, or the opportunity for a strategic breakthrough at a certain at certain moments in history. You have this opportunity to have a breakthrough to a different stage in humanity. That's what he's working towards. And I think this is from your essay, I think this comes out that there is a direct analogy of that to the movement in science, to the transition in science, that there is a break from the logic of science of each period, and going forward, a new logic, a new stage in science comes about. And the other thing I was thinking was that this, I think you were saying this idea that Winston rejects the positivist capture of science as well as the pragmatist rejection. I think that's something. I was saying I think it's something really deep, and I'm trying to work out. But I think positivism ultimately is an anti-human philosophy, because it essentially denies the human agency to know what is not yet known, towards knowledge. And this is what at every stage. This is what we have been talking about for a while in the science reading group. Because I think it started for a month or so back, because we were talking about how Du Bois talks about positivism in Sociology Hesitant, and how how in the 20th century quantum mechanics and so on, how positivism had captured the interpretation, the epistemological interpretation of science. And I think the connection between the two is becoming clear, because in the 1800s, positivism was it was really more of a dogmatic or a mechanical materialism. Where you talk of where your understanding of science is that what you observe is the entirety of objective reality. And in the 1900s, with quantum mechanics, it goes to the other extreme. It goes towards the idealism that since you don't observe, since you do, with the advent of the statistical laws of quantum mechanics, since you observe the, since you observe these different aspects of reality based on your reference frame, that's why it essentially again denies objective reality. But ultimately what it's saying at every time is that science cannot be furthered, or knowledge cannot be furthered. And I think what's coming clear from like in your essay is that Winston saw this. He saw that science, even like social science, can be weaponized in this way. It can be weaponized by the ruling class, in a way similar to how science has always been weaponized at every stage, by capturing, by it being captured by the ruling class. And therefore, I'm thinking of the Black proletariat imaginary as like the way for, the way out of this capture, like this capture of logic. Yeah, I mean that's to start off. That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
I think the way that you were describing Winston's life just now, and I don't know, it just really touched me for one thing, but it also reminded me of like King's The Dimensions of a Complete Life.
Yeah.
Like, what does it mean to actually live a complete life and to be able to use that in like furnishing something for society and for the future? And I don't think that like the three, basically like the scientific rational, the Black proletarian imaginary, and like the revolutionary moral imperative, it's not that they map on directly to the three dimensions or anything like that, but there's something very like significant in it for me, I think, because it's sort of like you start from the individual, you're trying to understand like what you're capable of or like what you're going to do in this life. And that kind of reminded me of what Shimbarto was saying about positivism or quantum mechanics, where what you observe becomes your reality. But then the Black proletarian imaginary is so deep because it goes much further than that. Like basically it's saying that actually there is a social component to all of this. And in some ways, like it's a socialized, but it's like also more complete because it comes out of the experience of many. And and I think like I'm still really thinking a lot more about this Black proletarian imaginary, but something about like the way that you described like leaps or like novel insights, but it's like you're able to make a break from that first like existing paradigm or whatever to make it much fuller and to actually like make it advance. And but then yet like that still needs to be grounded by like the moral imperative. And I feel like for me, like the moral imperative does kind of feel like God, but all this to say that like I don't think it's really so much that they're like three, separate categories, because actually it's science that provides the framework of categories in the first place. But I think it's the way that like somebody was saying that actually science is like the first step, but it's not enough. Like it's what you need as like a baseline, but it's by no means enough. It's only the beginning to be able to reach for more. And I think I'm still really trying to better understand the Black proletarian imaginary. Like it's a little bit, I think it's a new term. So I'm still like floating around a lot of it, but I think it's a really beautiful concept. Yeah. And I think it also fits in with a lot of things that in preschool we have been talking about for a long time, like the jazz, like the sorrow songs, or like even Du Boisian sociology. And all of that I think comes out of something which is not anti-science, but is something that is sort of like unique. So I just thought it was a really impressive article.
And maybe this idea of the rational scientific or the scientific in fact, I think, and I should say, that is an incomplete construal of science. Because without these other two, it's not a complete idea of science, and not a complete practice of science. And to have a complete practice, especially of revolutionary science, or science for revolution, you need, especially in the United States, you need that imaginary, all of that, the sorrow songs, the jazz, blues, all of that. Because it allowed Winston to understand the language of the most oppressed and most exploited.
Right.
And just like Ransom said, most of those people never talked about it.
Right.
You know, I know they never talked about him in my family.
Yeah.
It was like, you know, let's keep it. I mean, and probably the trauma and suffering was so great, they didn't want to talk about it. But then it took, you know, someone, I think that's what Winston was working out. And he would not abandon the Black proletarian imaginary in the name of Marxism. You know, like you got a lot of, you know, Black folk, Black intellectuals, and white intellectuals who say to Black people, well, you're not completely a Marxist because you're XYZ, you know what I'm saying? This kind of Marxism that is made and designed for white people.
Right.
And if you're gonna be a Marxist, you got to be with white people. And so Winston upsets that whole equation.
Yeah, like when Chomsky was saying that he can't stand to listen to King because it's like an attack on
He's a
like
sick
logic.
man.
No, but I think that's really the distinction. Like that's exactly how far the purely rational can
Yes,
get you. And it's
absolutely.
only to there. But then I think, yeah, like with King, like you get the Black proletarian imaginary, you get the moral imperative. And I feel like that's more of the completeness. Because I think even, yeah, I think it's to say that science actually has much greater possibility
Absolutely.
than the purely rational would like confine it to. And I feel like that's also what Einstein in some ways was saying.
The other thing, sorry, I just wanted to respond to what Shambharta was saying. It also made me realize that I think for people like Einstein and Winston, it was clear that this counter-revolutionary move to basically say this is as far as we go and we can go no further is always a possibility. And you have to basically leverage science and the scientific method to actively struggle against the always real possibility that there's going to be a counter-revolution and a breakage or a stoppage of, you know, moving forward. And this is also why I really appreciated the way you talked about time in this essay. And, you know, this is a question that we think about a lot, you know, even with your Baldwin or, you know, just even Lotus or all of that, we're thinking of, okay, this is a significant time. There is a special significance of this particular time because something new is about to come forth or be birthed, right? But it's a difficult concept to explain why exactly the time is significant or what it is. And so then if you sort of see it scientifically, you know, the way you were talking about Winston, looking at time as not separate from the material world, but something that has a dialectical relationship to society and human social relationships, that actually helps explain, you know, the way you're supposed to think of time as a category. So you're not just saying that, oh, this time is just a thing in itself, but it's also something that you have the ability to affect by your actions. But then time also produces what actions are possible. You know, it's just, I don't know how to say it very well, but I feel like that kind of thinking or introduction of that kind of dialectical thinking to the scientific method itself also helps you sort of ward off these counter-revolutionary measures. Because this was also what Einstein, I mean, this is what we read in Science Reading Book this week, where Einstein was basically like, you know, his entire thing about special relativity was basically to say, no, we're not going to, space-time does not exist outside of material reality. It's something that's interconnected. So you can only talk about things, reality, but then, you know, things in relationship to one another. So, I mean, I'm just starting to appreciate how similar these concepts are. And because I'm realizing it and it's blowing my mind, I'm also realizing how intentional the separation of these ideas have been in our thinking, you know? Because if you separate those ideas, you sort of incapacitate people to make sense of all of this as part of, you know, larger truth or a larger movement towards truth. Yeah, I just want,
Yeah, I guess it's the with the question of the rational and the limitations of the rational, the effects or almost the symptoms of a rational framework because my question to that was, how is the Black imaginary affected by a rational framework, or the Black imaginary applied to the rational framework? Those are two different things, meaning that the rational has to include like the body of the 19th, 18th century of rational thinkers and philosophy and things like that. And what that would mean is something that, I don't know very much about. But I can also assume that in the opposite, the Black imaginary using the rational is also creating something different. And that also would connect and mean that the rational has also a more expanded, like you can't just say that there is solely the European thinkers in the rational if the Black imaginary is affected or affecting the rational body of thought. But then the second thing with Henry Winston, and also kind of in tandem with what we're saying is, what is the way out? And how does Henry Winston also provide as a model in a sense? But the movement from one epoch to the next, that's also what you're talking about in the piece, because we are shifting from the world of like the West to the age of humanity, or which way we said it. I forget which way we said that phrase, that age of humanity, new epoch. And then, the new ways of thinking, the new levels of human consciousness that are possible is ultimately enlarged and expanded. Because when you also talk about the point, there's something in the new human being, there's something that you had said that reminded me about the civil rights movement and Diane Nash, the nonviolent strategy. They also became new human beings in the process of struggle. And what Henry Winston is, and this reminds me of a similar conversation of Robeson, what of an intellect, what of the consciousness that, brings up the question of what is the quality, the human quality, that we are now in charge of taking responsibility for and also carrying into a new epoch. I mean, that's what's on the table.
Yeah.
Well, in talking about the Black imaginary, real quick, when you talk about sorrow songs and blue, the Avant-Garde, and what have you, when we talking about emotion, let us remember, because it's very easy within a Western, whatever you want to call it, to not understand, that encourage or misunderstand and a negative view of quote unquote emotion.
Yeah.
The word emotion is an abbreviation for energy, motion. That's how we move our energy. And that is so significant. And it does not make obsolete or unfunctional. And it's not in contradiction to logic and to, you see?
That's right.
So, and this man was telling, well, whatever. Let me shut up. That's all I just want to say.
It's very important. See, we hear a lot of talk of Eurocentrism, Afrocentrism, as just general nebulous phrases and concepts. The question is, indeed, with the life world of Winston, is that experience not an African experience? enslavement, transatlantic, yada, 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 yada. And so, what is reason and logic without the human? It's dogma. And that's part of what I was trying to get at. And the humanizing of all of this and bending all of it to the human purpose of freedom.
What do you think about?
And that's that's why it gets a little bit emotional for me. And I agree with this epoch because children and youth are coming up in a different epoch. How quickly they can catch up to the epoch in this kind. Everything is thrown at them to make sure that they don't catch up to the epoch. Go ahead.
Just to add briefly, because it was during the 10th anniversary where you had written out how slavery had also shifted or expanded the human experience in a way. Like we were talking about how people knew each other in a different way in that same time. Do you remember what I'm talking about? No.
Not quite.
But maybe it was just because of
I'm sorry.
Do you remember what I'm saying?
I think, the idea of the transatlantic slave trade creating a new epoch in human history.
Right. So, yeah, but like, it's in a similar vein, like because, or in that point that you're making, that what is known to the human being,
what is known?
What is known also became larger, became more expanded. What is known to be seen about the world, like I think in a similar point, like people knew each other in different ways. And
this is very interesting.
Yeah.
What is known and people knowing one another. This epoch of world capitalism, with all that is wrong, also it brought people together through the market to exploitation.
Yeah, and just because what's interesting about it is like because this whole question of science, because what was science, of the past? Like what was science of the past, right?
Exactly. This is very important. What was science in the epoch of the rise of capitalism is not science in the epoch of the downfall of capitalism.
And in the same way, because science, you're dealing with the question of truth and what is known. So the purpose of science, like you said with Einstein, the understanding of everyday thought, what are the questions of humanity? What is it that we're trying to either attain or better make possible? Whether that be a world peace or democracy, which are all scientific endeavors, actually.
Yes.
But that new stage, like we're reaching or struggling for it. So
this is this piece of, I don't know if I can get all of this.
No,
these are issues. This is why that first panel, everybody has to come prepared with all of these questions and discussions. I'm sorry.
No, I know. I don't mean to make it to say that you should include this in that specific way, because I'm saying that could be written is that in this, for humanity, we are faced with the responsibility, like you're saying. At the end, you had used those quotes from King, the fierce urgency of now, that kind of thing. Like you are saying it, but the meaning behind it is what I'm explaining. Why is it meaningful?
Yeah.
That's all.
This is helping me trying to make a connection between the imaginary and children.
Yeah.
I view them as a boundless, limitless potential of the imaginary, and similar to Winston and Black people at that time in general. Now, this great capacity for imaginary that Winston was not unique in, because he came out of the whole experience of Black people, but when given the tools, especially I guess Marx, Lenin, Du Bois, and others, could direct that to bring about a new reality. That's how powerful it was when you could direct that imaginary in a scientific way.
But then that imaginary changes science.
It does.
Right.
And that's what, it's not like, oh, I got my imaginary, now let me connect science and reason to it. It's like the whole world, and this is where I'm agreeing with Seraphine. You have to rethink science. And this imaginary, this experience, all of that stuff provides the basis for the defense of science. Because otherwise science becomes positivism and a bunch of people in these universities talking shit, and there's no human presence in any of it. But that and this cat like Winston, he's defending science against dogmatism. He really is. I don't know.
It's like the revolution, revolution of values. The revolution of values, meaning like, actually, what are the values that the American people, or that we share? What are the real values that we share? Not the values of the deep state or the ruling elite or the racists. He was saying, like, the way that King says it assumes there's a set of values that we actually carry in spite of the values that we go forth with. You know what I mean? Like, he's struggling against racism. He's struggling for peace. A revolution of values. There's a mindset of a different assessment of values, or of rational, or of the rational, the scientific. What is rational? What is the science? That's what's.
And see, that experience brings it up as a question rather than a given.
Right.
Oh, this is science, this is Marxism. No, he didn't, that's not the way he was rolling. Because if that, because all that, I believe you, it's hard, I'm not making this up, and you probably have experienced in your own life. You take a white Marxist. He or she is talking about a world that most people wouldn't recognize. That's not my life. I mean, oh, you super smart, you understand capitalist contradictions and all that kind of thing. But what about, and you talk about the working class, but there is no Black proletariat, and certainly no Black proletarian imaginary. And it's this thing of taking that imaginary out, and you've probably seen this yourself, Black workers just have to be the same as white workers. They're not the same. They're not the same. They bring a different quality. And that's what Winston brought to the scientific discussion and the critical discussion of what Marxism is and what the Communist Party should look like. He didn't fully realize his vision, believe me. So it ends up in what you got today. I'm sorry.
I take it as a compliment when I say something, you get activated. But this imaginary is not something that just makes you predisposed to science and then replaces the imaginary.
No.
It's not supposed to constrain you in any way.
No.
And as you said, the imaginary can allow you to generate new ways of science. And this when I'm thinking about especially children, how to have the imaginary feed into the science, and then the science feed into the imaginary.
It's a great pedagogical question.
This interplay that I don't understand, but I feel like it has to be like that.
Yeah.
And for a new American people, in the ways that need to be in this time. I think about Winston and an imaginary coming out of his experience. And then in Philadelphia right now, especially, I think this is one of the places of like heightened crisis. I think that this is a place that can especially need the freedom and the tools that a science can give that doesn't diminish the imaginary, that can bring the new American people. And when thinking about, I guess, the oneness that is occurring in the American people, where white people, in I guess, rising to the occasion, are becoming more black, and all people, I guess. How does this imaginary become part of the American people? But maybe back then, people might have thought of it more like, oh, we have a religion that helps you. I don't know, but some kind of way for that to be part of the American people is, I think, the necessity.
I like that point, Eddie, because there is this thing about whether or not the science and the imaginary. What is the imagination, right? It's the mind's active process of concretizing what it's thinking. I think what's interesting about that is then comes there, or they say phenomenology. That really wasn't what I meant so much. And I'll add that, when you say religion, it's not so much religion. I think it's the belief plus the practice of it. You know what I mean? So we all had that conference on Reverend James Lawson recently. Wonderful. I didn't see it, but wonderful. And so he's a methodologist, methodologically. It's the method toward nonviolence. And that's just based on this from political level. There's very many different levels to life, depending on how you explore it, right? And so, for example, you do AI, right? So that's the science plus the human element, you know what I mean? And I know there's that question of morality with AI. It depends if AI follows our footsteps. So I have morality. Also have its AI also have its difficulties too, though. Depends, depends on who's involved, or not who's involved, or the ideas involved. But I think it's for example, you surfing, you guys are, that's the imagination. And when you add it then to years of drawing or whatever, years of applying what you believe into the paper, basically. So I think it's really, I like the point.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, it seems like part of what is being argued through Winston is for the fulfillment of a new science against the degradation of science, which is basically what we have today. It's funny because I work in scientific academic publishing, my day job, and the thing that all of these companies that manage scientific publishing, basically scientific research, the thing that they're most concerned about is the anti-science sentiments of the general population, which I think is very funny. And they're always trying to find ways to basically shore up their legitimacy, the legitimacy of real, quote unquote, real science, which people have clearly rejected. And it manifests in so many different ways, especially in America. But I think I really like the way that you, first of all, I don't know, capture what Winston breathed in when he was growing up. I don't know, it was just really, as people said, it was really beautiful, but also the way that you described the imaginary and the intuitive, it helps to explain it's almost like the category that, or like the description that comes to mind most often with something like the civil rights movement, which is how do you explain the unexpected, which is exactly what the civil rights movement was, an unexpected movement of the people that the ruling class never could have predicted, and yet actually did affect a real transformation in America. And it's also like, I don't know if this is exactly the same, but like that quote that I read last week from Du Bois in Souls of Black Folk, the way that he describes the thought of Black people is as the thought of the things themselves. The thought of the things themselves. And so he's using it in an ironic way where it's like Black people basically were branded as like a thing, like not the human being, right? And so it's like out of that position, what kind of new thought and emotion emerges, like what new like force of like thinking. I don't know, it's just like it was just an interesting formulation of how he put it that I feel like is like in parallel to what you're saying about the intuitive. And just like the unique way that Black people.
It's all ironic. That's what I'm trying to say to you. It's not so mechanically put together like a puzzle. It's the irony of the whole situation. That science now is in the hands of the people who are not even supposed to be able to think, let alone think rationally. That's Oh, I'm sorry.
You gotta remember that's to the ruling class.
Yeah.
And I had like a few questions I think related to the essay. One of them was, I think, the specific use of like the logic of threes and the logic of threes and because I feel like this is something that we've been almost like trying to work out for the past basically for like the past year or so since the 10th anniversary. And like the specific logic of threes that is unfolding with Winston and like the scientific rational, the Black prophetic, the Black imaginary, and then the moral revolutionary imperative. I feel like what I'm trying to understand is what is the logic that is propelling it forward, because I feel like, for instance, when Du Bois is framing a similar, another triad in Black Reconstruction of the planter, the Black worker, and the white worker, it's like a different, I feel like there's a very clear contradiction there, whereas I feel like what I'm still trying to understand with how you're framing things is with these three different like modes of thinking almost, is it still propelled by a contradiction, or is it like a different thing that's propelling the relationship? Because but I don't know if this is actually relevant, but
it is very relevant.
But like,
and I don't know. I haven't
but it the funny thing is like, it makes me think about, and I don't know if this is again relevant, but like the way that, for instance, like Christians talk about the Trinity, like the God, Christ, and Holy Spirit thing, it's not propelled by like a contradiction, but it's a creative, like the way that I've always understood it as a kid was like, it's like a creative relationship amongst the three, and but there's still like a unity that is underlying it all. And so it's just interesting.
Can I just, and this is, I hope we can work. See, for me, the way I see it, the Black proletarian imaginary is the vital center, the critical center of the whole thing. There is nothing that holds it together. If you just said the rational, scientific, and the revolutionary imperative, okay, you can put them together, but it's still lifeless. You put that Black proletarian imaginary and know all of it, and of course he does a little bit of it by the study of music, that imaginary. But when you put that in, the whole thing, everything comes alive suddenly. But, and I agree with you, what are the relationships between the three? Okay, I haven't figured it out, but the one question, is it dialectical, which means contradictory? Or is it formal, which means we just put them together mechanically? Is it ironical, obviously there is an ironic relationship between the rational and the imaginary, if not a contradictory one, but definitely ironic. And then when you put black on and proletariat on the imaginary, you're upsetting a lot of shit here now. You're going out to deep water because go ahead.
No, I mean, I feel like the other thing that was really cool when I was just listening to it is like it reminded me of Science Reading Group a lot, but also there's that famous Thomas Kuhn book, The Structure of Scientific Revolution.
Oh, yes.
But I mean, I don't know if like how relevant it is because I haven't read it, to be honest. But the thing that's so interesting is like basically it's like not just the nature of like Winston's scientific revolution, but like the merging of science and revolution, and then like what is actually propelling that. And and I don't know, it's just a very, there's a lot to be worked out
because you're going against so much that is common sense,
right.
The common sense notion of science, which most scientists adhere to, which is a fantasy. So most scientists, as I've learned from my friends, most scientists live in a fantasy world. It's fictional, you know. But then, you know, to any of it, if you said that science is connected to revolution, oh please, how can you say that? You know, and I'm a conservative and I'm going to uphold, you know. So that's already, you know, it's like if you say such things, then it's like you're an outsider intruding on their beautiful house, you know, this beautiful house of science. But then the crime of all crimes, this is Du Bois talking about Jack Johnson, his crime of crimes was his blackness, his unforgivable blackness. And that's a great crime within science, the fiction of science, this unforgivable black imaginary. It's unforgivable. But it is, you know what I'm saying? You get my point. I agree with the way you're putting it, Jerry, this question of what is going on here. And what is it, a new science emerging, you know, something.
Well, that also gets to the one other question I had was, you frame like how Winston is using like Du Bois and Lenin.
Yes.
Du Bois is a specific theory and Lenin, like Marxism-Leninism, is a general theory. And I was wondering if you could like expound on that more, but especially for this moment, like I feel like this is also just me saying it from the perspective of like, you know, I feel like in the free school, basically, we've all been brought up in Du Bois, right? And I feel like part of what I feel, which is maybe not, like, I don't know how, I guess, rational it is, but I feel like Du Bois is like a general theory kind of thing.
I could see that easily.
But it's more that if like you understand, first of all, that what Marx and Lenin offer is like a general theory of the crisis of capitalism,
or the
right?
general theory of the development of capitalism.
Right. Yeah. And what Du Bois...
General theory of the class conflict.
Right. And what Du Bois brings in is like almost like a general theory of like that, but also like the civilizational thing, and like the fact that basically the epoch that we are emerging out of is not just the epoch of capitalism, but the epoch of literally like of the West, like the epoch of Western domination over the world. And like that has to be considered as not a distinct phenomenon, but like an integral part of the epoch from which we're emerging. And so I feel like, I don't know, maybe that could, explain.
Could I just suggest a way that it's, you know, because all of this is cascading. This is why it's so difficult.
Yeah.
Could Du Bois replace Lenin?
I wish he spoke more. I mean, I wish he spoke more. You know, I wish, you know, with Du Bois, because basically was. I mean, there's
See,
equal.
but isn't
He did
that the-
speak
isn't
a
that the
lot,
problem,
but I
Alex?
wish he did.
Yeah, but see, the question is, could the general theory be replaced by a more concrete theory?
Absolutely, yeah,
See,
absolutely.
but
'cause,
don't, hey,
I'm not to
hey,
get
yeah,
ahead,
no,
not to get
All I'm
ahead,
saying
yeah.
is, let's leave it as a question right now.
Well, it's a question. I mean,
Yeah,
question-
a problematic
Thank you.
to be investigated. But it flows out of what Jerry is saying.
Right.
Well, if Lenin is the general theory of capitalist development, the general theory, and it is more because it is not that specific or concrete. You
That's
mean
what people
imperialism,
oriented,
but here you get Du Bois doing all this empirical research and data on a concrete country. Marx or Lenin never did any of that. I can tell you, nothing close to it.
That's very significant.
Yeah, and it's very significant. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know the answer. We got to figure this out. Is Du Bois a new general theory based upon concrete experience of the United States? Now, of course, Marx's Das Kapital becomes a general theory based upon his study of the English factory system. But here, but I would have to say, I would argue, and Das Kapital is first of all, and Danny Jacobs got this right when Danny Jacobs outed me saying that my favorite philosopher was Kant. I tried to keep it on.
Really?
but you see, Danny is constantly going to Adam Smith as the foundation of Karl Marx's work. You know what I'm saying? And I'm saying, okay, if let's take an analog. Let's say that Adam Smith was the general theory of capitalism, and Marx, studying the English factory system, was a specific theory, a concrete theory. But then, as it turns out, Marx and the concrete theory has replaced Smith. And so Marx becomes the general theory. It is not out of the question based upon everything that we're talking about, including this change of epoch science and different epochs, that Du Bois could become the general theory, replacing the old general theory.
Wow. Movement in time.
Because
The movement of time.
that's right. I mean, everything opens up.
Wow.
Everything opens up. So, like you get like groups like Platypus that say that the left is dead, Marxism is dead, and so on. Well, there could be an element of truth, but I would say I think a lot of their narrative is undialectical. But that's another question. But if it is dead, then what is replacing it? I agree. I mean, it's just like so interesting to make you want to jump up and start shouting, because not only the Black proletarian imaginary, you want to bring them into the discussion of science, crime of crimes, you out of order, you know what I'm saying? But then, how dare you suggest that the concrete theory, i.e. Du Bois, must replace the old general theory, i.e. Marx. Which doesn't take anything away from Marx or make Du Bois what he is not, but it looks at the movement of knowledge and science and what is now the general theory. I agree with you. You into something. Because let's not, I'm sorry, I'll shut up. I was going to talk about John Maynard Keynes and his general theory. Go ahead, Sarah.
What was his general theory?
Well, he called it that, a general theory of credit, money, and I forget the other one. Huh? Interest, credit, money, I think those are the three, but it was called a general theory. That's what I was just.
What was it?
But,
What was it about?
huh?
What was it about?
Economics.
Well, yeah, but
Yeah,
what was
but I'm just on the, see the question of knowledge and science. You did where I'm coming from, knowledge and science and how it moves forward. And don't discriminate because one cat is black. don't discriminate against one. And that's why, you know, and I'll shut up. Let me shut up.
You know, I was just thinking that in this time when social science is barely considered a science,
Yes.
the science of society, the science of people is barely considered a science.
Yes.
It really betrays that we have been through a steady period of counter-revolution which has led to this point, right? And I keep going back to what you were saying about Winston's childhood. You know, like he has seen an unimaginable amount of pain and suffering and oppression, right? But and we already know that he thinks scientifically. So scientifically, he came to the conclusion that empathy is the answer. He came to the conclusion that you might see a lot of suffering and oppression, but the way that you respond to it is not reaction and victimhood, which is rational today. You know, that has become the rationale of today. And I think that has become so because of this counter-revolution throughout the years leading up till now. But I think that the only way that he could have gotten to this conclusion, and I don't think that he was the only one who did, I think King did as well, and others who really understood people who were born of the people and lived by them. And they had this black proletarian imaginary always as a part of their lives. And that kind of scientific, because if you think about it, you have seen pain, you have suffered, you've been poorer than poor. You can say there is a rationale to be bitter about your environment or the conditions, but it's this imaginary that makes you go against this. It makes you go against it and say that no, the answer lies in something different.
Yeah. See, and I think with Winston, it pushes him towards science and reason, you know, and to enrich it, but then it at the same time pushes him towards revolution.
Right.
You know, it's just, I mean, you know, interestingly, Winston might be a case study.
Yeah.
You know, a case study, kind of a black swan, an outlier who advances the whole thing.
You really have to look at his faith in science. You know, you really have to look at his faith in science and the way that all of his thoughts are dialectical thoughts. You know, he doesn't. It's not. He doesn't operate in the categories of black and white, and in this case, black and white, like metaphorically speaking. And you know, you mentioned that Kant is your favorite.
I haven't owned that yet.
But you know, when Kant said that as part of moral philosophy or deontological moral philosophy, there are some things that people do as an imperative, his establishment of
that's right.
moral imperative.
That's right.
And
That's
Winston,
Kant.
that's Kant, right? That he was like, there are just some things that people do opposed to reason almost. And Winston's evolution of that theory from a moral imperative to a revolutionary imperative.
This is, and the moral imperative is revolutionary imperative. That's what I was trying to. Yeah.
Can critique? I'm sorry, but just thinking about this, imperative, and kind of what you're saying about Kant. Didn't King critique him? I guess philosophically speaking, Hegel. I mean, no, excuse me, Marx. We're not not taking more from Hegel.
What King was critiquing were Marxists.
That's what I'm saying.
That's what
I'm saying. That's straight, because there's more to life. Not say,
But see, the Kantian,
there's just more aspects.
Nature. Kant was developing, as he saw, a philosophy of science, a philosophy that would equip science to do its job better, so to speak. Hegel, the same thing. You know what I'm saying? So, but they're looking at science in a very structured, rationalist way. You dig what I'm saying? That's what they're doing. And I'm not hating. It's a beautiful thing that they, that breakthrough. But it applies primarily to natural science, physical science, not to social science. And that's where it gets messy because you're dealing with the human being. And that's Du Bois. And Du Bois said positivism does not fit social science. You know what I'm saying? Because you're dealing with uncaused causes, the unpredicted, the improvisational, the whole, everything that's human. And that's why. But what is the human how does the human express itself in science, in the experience of the American working class, that Black proletariat? I'm convinced it is the engine of class consciousness in the United States, more than that conflict that leads to a strike. You see what I'm saying? Like you got the UAW strike. Okay, they're out. It looks like it's going to be a hard-fought, long strike. But what do they come out with at the end of the day? Well, they're going to hate the bosses. They're going to hate GM and Ford and so on. Well, good. But that's not yet class consciousness. In this whole, you need what we're calling the total experience, not only with the bosses, but with the fellow worker that is Black.
Where does the strike come from then?
Say that again.
Where does the strike come from then?
Yeah, the strike, okay, the bosses provoked the strike, but see, you ain't transformed by the strike.
Depends. It really depends. It's like you said one time to me. You talked about Prince's struggle with the music industry. It's the same with a lot of some guys.
See, AJ, dig it like this. Sure. See, and everybody, that qualitative leap. See, after the strike is over, white workers will view it in one way and have drug. Black workers will do it very differently. They see something different. You know what I'm saying? And it is that imaginary. They see something different. And that in fact is an area of sociological research. A great sociologist would go buck wild crazy studying something like this. You know what I'm saying? This is a beautiful thing. But
My other thing on my mind is the civilization and potentiality. The civilization.
Oh,
and
yeah, civilization and potentiality.
Just on that concept, because, like, really with what you're saying also is that it was the Black proletariat to even have a civilization in
Isn't that the
America.
question? Whether this civilization and potentiality will become the civilization of a whole people, of a whole nation.
Yeah.
And we're flirting with that all the time in our free school discussions.
Yeah. This is just a small note, but earlier when you were reading the essay, I was also really moved by the parts where you talked about Winston as basically a child of the early 20th century and what that meant, but also a child of the Second American Revolution, Reconstruction. And yeah, I've been processing it during our conversation, but yeah, specifically he said he grew up under the Jim Crow and sharecropping laws. And actually what my mind went to was it almost explained something about the Third American Revolution and the imaginary that we see there and how tied it is to the Second Revolution. Because you have all these figures like King, Baldwin, Robeson, who say things like, okay, my father was a preacher, or my father or my grandfather was a slave.
That's right.
And what it meant for that slave to achieve freedom like a switch. Because I had actually reread Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain recently, and that, I mean, if we're going to talk about the Black proletariat imaginary, the whole novel is suffused with that reach, you know, and he even had a passage that it felt a lot like Du Bois's Coming of the Lord in Black Reconstruction, which
Souls. Oh no, Coming Black. I'm sorry.
yeah, like what it was just so real, like what it meant for that freedom to suddenly cascade upon a people, and for the people to also be prepared to, you know, be unleashed. Yeah, I just think there's something there that I'm still trying to draw out, but what it meant that Winston was also coming out of that time.
Yeah, history.
And so well, I know we should move on to Avant-Garde, but this,
Okay.
so we don't need to have the symposium here today. But I hope everybody comes to the symposium filled with all of these questions and theories. This is very, in a lot of ways, we could be helping to decide the future of social science.
I think so.
As such, and the defense of social science and of science generally.
Yeah. Well, I want to say one small thing, like about, like this last thing about the general and special theory that, you guys were talking about. And like, I was also thinking of this initially because in the natural sciences, there's this idea that the special theory, like, that's the one that comes first and then it's generalized. Like, that's the way with Einstein, right? And I was thinking, like, this conversation about the class struggle or Marxism being the general theory of today or Du Bois. I was thinking it depends on what we see as the universal category in the vanguard of struggle. Like, is it the worker or is it the enslaved or the neo-colonial proletariat? And if you're thinking about that as the category which the category through which to see the ideological struggle, then it seems to point the way towards Du Bois as the more general, like in this time. But yeah, that was we can move on to.
This is getting very transgressive. Because we're going somewhere that social science and radical ideology would hesitate to go to, because it might be becoming the general theory. In its scope, it was far more global.
Because the way that Du Bois describes like even in Russia and America, I think the
Yeah.
term that he uses is a science of human action.
Yeah.
Like that's the way he
Yeah.
frames like his social
Isn't that
science and
interesting?
sociology.
Now, in free school, we talk about the science of human capacity.
Yeah.
The same thing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe we should go to avant-garde.
We have some
Do you
comments.
want comments or do you want to just go?
Oh, yeah, well, let's do comments. We need to do, I'm
Okay,
sorry.
no. Okay, Todd, Kathy, Danny, Christopher Romero, and Brother Gregory say good morning, and Brother Gregory says peace and blessings to all, as usual. Danny had commented a while ago, I don't think rational is reducible to the conceptual. Intuition is rational because it's social. It might be the first form of sociability, such as sympathy or pity. And so for
Such as?
Sociability, so I think the emotions of like sympathy, pity, things like that. And so he says, for him, rational really means intelligible. And I think that's what we would argue, which is that it's not like, I think you said that maybe the Black proletarian imaginary could be considered irrational, but I don't think it is irrational. I think the first category, it could be like the way we were talking about it is more like the so-called rational, but it's so limited that actually, like the social intuition is rational. And then Layat has a lot of comments.
Who is that?
Layat, Betra, she's at Stan.
She comments.
Yeah. She says, good morning, joined late today and caught only the end of Jacques' essay, but what I heard and the discussion thus far has me even more excited for the first issue of Avant-Garde. It seems like a form of proof of what folks are expressing, that the positivist, rationalist basis of modern science has yielded only widespread apathy, alienation, and doomism.
Yep.
The experience and insight of a Henry Winston and the empathy it inspires is as scientific as it gets because it is responding to the concrete, not defining it out of the equation. And then she quotes, what is science without the human? It's dogma, which I think was from the conversation. And she says, yes, exactly this. The science that is taught, practiced, and wielded today is distrusted by the people because they can tell it has been weaponized against them. That's not being anti-science or anti-intellectual. And she points to the example of the Canadian Parliament this week. She says, these elite are guilty of all the crimes they accuse the masses of. They are the most anti-science and anti-intellectual lot that history has ever produced. She says, it would only be strictly terrifying if we didn't also have assurance that its historical counter-tendency, like the revolutionary tendency, is alive and well among the people both in this country and around the world. And she is responding to, I think, when we were talking about Thomas Kuhn, and says, Kuhn only talks about scientific revolutions as moments where the scientific community replaces one theoretical paradigm with another. And so she says it's actually an incredibly narrow conception of revolution. But unfortunately, it's as close to a theory of revolution as many scientists have. And yeah, that's the last one.
Okay. Yeah, we can give some updates on Avant-Garde, and people who are also working on the first issue and all that stuff should also weigh in and give updates. But basically where we're at is we're trying to launch the journal in time with the Winston Symposium. So November like 11th, 12th, that kind of thing. And basically we have, what is it, like 1, 2, 3, 4, like 9 different pieces that are going to be going into the first issue, which I think we covered before, but just again to give a reminder, we have obviously Doc's essay on Winston, which will also be published in that new version of Strategy, published by Todd and others. Then we have Serafina developing a painting on Black Reconstruction, which is in process. And then also Nuri is developing an article on civilization and civilization as a category, almost a Du Boisian category, but also civilization as a category for this time, and the achievement of almost like a new modernity in some ways. And then Emily is writing an article on Trotskyism, a warning to the young generation. which I think will be really interesting also in light of this conversation, because I think this is just more of me speaking, but part of what distinguishes, I think, this moment from the period in which Winston was writing, or even when you were part of the Communist Party, is that whereas I feel like Winston many times was writing basically in defense of Marxism, Leninism, and also but basically more so in defense of the world communist movement, as like a working active force in the world at the time. I feel like when we do a critique of Trotskyism, it is not that we're going against Marxism, Leninism, or the world communist movement, but we are also writing in defense of basically, if we tentatively like arguing, let's say that Du Bois is like maybe offers a general theory for this moment, we're writing more from that perspective, and it's not to be like, oh, we need to go back to the principles of Marxism, Leninism, which I feel like was kind of more part of the dynamic in the past. So it's an interesting challenge in some ways for all of us to articulate like a scientific way of critique, which I think is an important part of what we're doing with Avant-Garde. And Emily's, working on this essay and examining like Trotskyism as in its current manifestation as an ideological trend that basically captures young people. Then Michelle is doing a photo retrospective of the Free School, which will be like a series of photos, maybe with a few like brief written things accompanying it. And then Kathy, as we all know, is doing her article on free jazz and the World Festival of Youth and Students and Archie Shepp in Philadelphia. And I feel like we got a good sense of that last week. And then Eddie is writing an essay on basically like the role of like Mexican Americans and Latinos in the United States, but how they can find their way towards the Black freedom struggle, and also, but more broadly, to also reach toward this Afro-Asiatic reconfiguration of the world. And then Jahan is developing his critique of Gerald Horne and settler colonialism and all that stuff. And I'm also developing a critique of Norman Finkelstein in his recent book on like wokeness and cancel culture and stuff like that. I think that's all of the pieces. But yeah, there's a lot of, as people can say, there's like a lot of different moving pieces that need to be worked out like ideologically, but also just, like Michelle and I and others part of the editorial board were trying to also develop like the visual presentation of the journal, from the website to like a logo to even if we don't print, for instance, like the first issue is like a printed thing. I think it would be really cool if we had like still like an image or just like the first issue, like almost like a magazine cover or something like that. So yeah, like Serafina's working on stuff as well. So yeah, there's a lot of different moving pieces. But yeah, we're basically entering a stage in which people are fleshing out. Yeah, like we're hitting the critical moment where people are like fleshing out their articles, fleshing out their pieces, doing revisions, trying to basically get into a place where we can have things ready by November. So, yeah.
Throughout the talks, because we've had meetings to discuss all of our articles, I just want to bring up they are all like, they mean a lot to one another's topics, if that makes sense. Like they all are related. And one of the ties that I'm seeing is the struggle for world peace. And our studies and our conversations that we have in free school will be kind of ongoing and affects all of our articles and the things that we work on. So it, isn't like we can't grow from what we're writing at all. In fact, it's the opposite. In that we learn so much and we're consolidating a lot to say these things about world peace, about the American people, and working out like these philosophical and ideological framework, this philosophical and ideological framework that we have. But similar to our conversation that we're having about Henry Winston, the reason why in my mind, this whole thing about, world peace and the crisis of neocolonialism or the American people are like major concepts that we're dealing with is because in the way that we are writing, we are justifying the 10th anniversary. And like you're saying that there is a sky, there's a future to struggle for that is worth struggling for. There's a world that's worth struggling for. But it's been really nice to see how it'll kind of come together. The second thing is with the logo, iterations have happened, and I've kind of landed on developing, not very much landed, but developing this one idea which consists of the new world coming into being, showing the Afro-Asiatic, like Africa and Asia. And I kind of wanted to use like two human people, which are also protecting or, kind of, I have an image of it, I can show it, but that's generally kind of the idea that I have about avant-garde, which deals with the war, because I thought, or I had a moment where actually Martin Luther King has everything to do with avant-garde. And what that means is that the Black proletariat and what we're working out as the Black proletariat imaginary has everything to do with avant-garde. Meaning, okay, what is a Black imaginary? What is a Black proletariat? One of the things that has to do with it is how the world proletariat, like you're saying, the neo-colonial, and the Black proletariat is not, solely a specific or solely of the America. It is what connects, this American people, the consciousness of the American people to the world that is also becoming, like we're seeing with BRICS. And so that's also why the Afro-Asiatic reconstitution has everything to do with the Black proletariat imaginary, and why I wanted to include it in that way. And yeah, so that's what I'm kind of running with. And I can show it. I don't know if I have it on here. It'll be fun. Oh yeah, I do. Okay. Yay.
Wow.
Yeah.
See,
Show the owl.
this is interesting.
It's just an idea,
Yeah.
kind of grungy right now, but I wanted to make it more, I wanted to put it on nice paper and then work it out a little bit
I'll
better.
turn this way, please.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
that's kind of what I'm working with as a logo,
For the journal.
for the journal.
Wow.
But, this also made me think that, I've been looking at so much stuff that you can, that has to do with BRICS and stuff this week. I was looking at a bunch of speeches and stuff, and all the stuff that they use, like Xi Jinping and Putin, is still the Picasso bird. They're still using the bird in some way. And another thing that this magazine will do is put on the map that this country is not going really anywhere, and that we're still struggling for a new world like the rest of the countries that are also coalescing, which I think is actually really important.
Is there anything else to say on this?
Sounds good.
I guess we just, okay, just a few things on the election. As you know, last Sunday, a poll came out, ABC Washington Post, which of course is a mainstream poll, showing Trump leading Biden by 10 points.
Welcome there.
And, and it means or suggests if this trend continues, that Biden cannot be the candidate for the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And if not Biden, then who? Or if it is Biden, will the election effectively be over by May or June next year? Trump will have moved so far ahead of him. Well, one thing is for certain, that the Democratic Party and the Biden campaign is falling apart. There are all kinds of factions within the Democratic Party. As you know, Kamala Harris is connected to the Obama wing. Then there's the Biden or Hillary Clinton wing. And maybe a Bernie Sanders AOC wing. But if Biden is not the candidate, or if it seems that it is inevitable that he will lose, then these different factions will literally go into war with each other. The opposite is the case with the Republican Party. It is now the Trump Party, or the Trump movement, with a few elite elected official senators and others holding on and wishing and hoping that this Trump thing goes away. But we have this budget fight where it boils down to a fight over funding for the Ukraine war.
Oof. They can't keep it. I mean, it would just be stupid. It would be silly. It would be silly if they continue to fund the war. I mean, with everything
But
that's
see,
going on,
isn't this interesting that the whole budget thing is boiling down to the issue of war and peace? If the war is not funded, well, you don't yet have a complete majority in the House, but if the war against Russia is being skeptically received politically, well, what does that say about war with China? Could this not be, and it's too early, I think, to say the beginning of a new kind of peace movement?
They gotta catch
You know,
themselves.
an anti-war movement, And so we just have to keep our eyes, but all of this will be a part of the 2024 election. Now, of course, when you talk of the Trump movement, you're talking about all kinds of people. It is a movement. And you get, if you go on YouTube and look at some of these podcasts, some of the wildest, craziest people who like Trump because they don't like the fact that they've been locked out. And it's not a principled political relationship. It's not like us. We want Biden defeated because of their war policies. But then,
Is Tulsi running? Is Tulsi running?
No.
She should.
Well, it would be a great thing, and we have to see where Cornell goes, how he develops. But I think, Robert F. Kennedy is going to speak here on October 9th. And I think it's predicted that he is going to run as an independent. Anybody got any information on that?
Yeah, come on.
On his website, we looked, he has days booked for the 8th, 7th, and 8th. He doesn't have the reserve on the 9th. I'm trying to go.
He announced it though.
Yeah, it says that the Kennedy's campaign is now planning attack ads against the DNC to pave way for his announcement in Philadelphia about running as an independent, according to a text review by Mediaite.
It's like a random news outlet, I guess.
What did they say again?
A random news outlet have also recorded. I'll reread it. It says Kennedy's campaign is now planning attack ads against the DNC to pave the way for his announcement in Philadelphia about running as an independent, according to a text review by Mediaite. The Real Clear Politics polling average for the Democratic nomination shows Kennedy at 14.9%, well behind Biden at 65%. The only other Democratic candidate, Marianne Williamson, is at 4.9%.
She's the
I'm not sure what McArdle is though. In this article, it's bringing up McArdle, but maybe that's just the article.
I've been asked to ask you to reread that.
Hold on.
Well, I think already this coalition of the discontented, Cornell in most real clear politics polls is polling somewhere around 4 or 5%, which is not bad. And also the fact that young Black people, especially young Black men, are leaving the Democratic Party in droves. If young Black men are leaving, it's not far behind that older Black men. I think they're all leaving together. They've already left. And I agree.
It's a small percentage, but that's enough to call it.
I think you're absolutely
No,
right.
especially, it's a majority Black city, but the state is majority, white, whatever, and that's not to say nothing.
But you're absolutely right. The Democrats cannot win Pennsylvania without Philadelphia. They can't.
And do we need them to?
Well,
unless it's Cornell running Democrat.
no,
He's an independent. So unless it's RK, he doesn't even need to run under.
But see, the thing.
I don't know why he's going.
No. That's cool. But see,
I don't know why he is.
But see, the thing is that the question is, can Biden win? Can he win Pennsylvania? And I would say at this point, no, based upon, a lot of things, including the last mayoral primary, where 75% of Black registered voters didn't even come out to vote. You can't win. And the Electoral College and the battleground states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, maybe Virginia, Georgia, Arizona, there are about 6 or 7 battleground states, and that's where it's going to be fought out. And it looks like the battleground states, Biden can't win. He can't win. I don't think well, anyway.
Except with mail-in ballots. Except with mail-in ballots. That's how Seth lost.
Well, this will be it. But anyway, let's say without the corruption of mail-in ballots.
Right. That's the interesting thing about Philly right now, though. Because he lost because he won the election, right? He won that ward, whatever district, whatever award leader. He at election day he won. After mail-in ballots were counted, he lost. So that might be. It might speak to. It might not be corruption. It might, but it is like a.
But if it's a straight-up election, it's going right now.
Yeah.
The political realignment is occurring. It's going forward. And we have, by the way, we should all try to go to the Robert F. Kennedy event wherever it's held. This will be very, very important. I think going forward, the year of Baldwin, we should think about reaching out to Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy and Cornell to join rallies here in the name of Baldwin. Which is, by the way, I have to tell you, just a small thing, because we've been spending a lot of time in the planning of the Baldwin event, and it's a big thing because we want, how we in the year of Du Bois, we got a city council resolution. And the year celebrating the celebration of the Indian independence, we had a mayoral proclamation.
What about
we decided against getting any mayoral or city council because of the nasty politics that will be taking place next year. In other words, let us say we got a city council resolution supporting the involvement. And then we had a rally with Cornell West or whatever. And they would say, oh, hold it, wait a minute. We didn't pass this resolution for you all to get involved in politics against a Democratic candidate, you know what I'm saying? So we said, we're not going to even try that route. But it is, everything is made more complex. This is going to be a bitter ideological struggle because the Blackness leadership class is going to be losing their hold upon the Black voters. And they're going to fight very bitterly to hold on. And of course, every other kind of opportunist and, is going to try to jump in and claim to be the alternative to the Blackness leadership class and, all of that. So it's going to be ugly, it's going to be bitter. A good part of it would be, at least from the elites, would be grounded in opportunism and political ambition. So I think it does, I'll just say all that to say, we just have to go forward with with the way we do things. And out of this, I think we will be stronger, the people will be stronger, the people will be more ideologically consolidated. Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
No, I mean, just what was bubbling up in my mind is that the election, and like we always talk about, what is the election about?
Yeah.
What are the presidential campaigns running on? Either Kennedy, Trump, or Cornell. And, against the deep state, that's one of the stances, against forever wars and endless wars. This remaking of the American people, like one of Kennedy's, I was watching one of Kennedy's advertisements, and he was emphasizing the goodness of the American people.
Yeah.
And like the possibility of the state, like the American state, being overturned is also like on the table, actually, because and I think that what that would mean is definitely a lot, but it also means that we'll keep going.
That's a hard
And
thing to
but I just wanted to bring that up.
And at the end of it, and we'll see it already, the state will be weakened.
Yeah.
It might not be overturned, but their hold on the American people is severely weakened.
Mm-hmm.
This is a situation we've never been in. Everybody says it. I don't think Cornell has articulated it yet, but Trump and Kennedy have.
But maybe not overturn, weekend, but at least, but then it's like the people and their place in the American, the question of the government or the state.
And that's why we see the possibilities of a democratic upsurge. It's not taking that form quite yet, but it's almost implicit in the whole thing, imminent. There's something going on here with the people, not the candidates, something going on among the people that's completely new.
Yeah, I agree.
Because I feel like part of the interesting thing about this time is that it's like the level of the crisis in America has reached such a magnitude in which an election means more than just an election almost. And not just like the form it takes, but like what its impact could be exceeds that of basically, I feel like previous elections in American history. And something that we talked about recently in the Bandung group is like essentially the question of through something like an electoral process and then ultimately trying to get a figure elected, can it's like almost like, can the federal government be used as a weapon against the state? Like, can the government be used as a weapon against the state? Because I feel like that's basically like, if you think about
That's more specific.
it's like, when you think about, if you frame the Trump movement as an actual movement, it's like you have to ask, what is its objective? What is its aim? And I feel like the easy answer is just to get Trump elected again. But no, they see Trump as their instrument and weapon against the deep state. I feel like that is ultimately, they want to eliminate what they see as like the permanent bureaucracy of DC and all that stuff. And so I feel like, I don't know, it's just a very interesting time, but also a time to like, when things that may have been one thing in the past, like an election, suddenly takes on a new significance in this time. And also, yeah, I feel like basically the point is not like that if Trump gets elected, that this would be like a revolution or something, but it is a democratic breakthrough. And also, I feel like what we see as a potential of this election is, yeah, one, to weaken the state, but also like an opportunity to further unite the people and to increase the democratic capacity of the American people as well under this broad umbrella. And I feel like that is that's basically like the kernel of like the possibility that we see in this. Because I think with RFK Jr., it seems like he's been meeting with like the chair of the Libertarian Party, which was also the Libertarian Party, which was, organized the Rage Against the War Machine rally that we went to. So.
Go ahead, Mom.
Yeah. Well, because I think maybe like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, or like 5 years ago, you would have been like, oh, elections are stupid. Like, oh, it's just business as usual. There are two parties, the system's rigged anyway. But I think now I feel like the ruling class, or like even the parties, like the Democratic Party in particular, is like on the defensive, like they're on the back foot, because what it shows is that your choices are basically either like Trump wins, maybe RFK wins, or like Cornel West. Either way, not the chosen candidate by the deep state. But then the thing is that in trying to basically attack RFK or prevent him from even having like a fair primary process, I feel like the state is also exposing itself. Like it's exposing how fundamentally undemocratic it is. And I feel like it is an opportunity, like I think it shows the people something new of like how corrupt it is, how undemocratic it is, and therefore like what the real avenue or the real path towards struggle is. And so it's kind of like, it is in some ways kind of a win-win situation, because I think the time is such that
something of a what situation?
Kind of like a win, like the people can't really fully lose, because either way, like something has been set into motion where you learn valuable lessons either way. And like the unification.
Well, I mean, the only possible loss if Biden wins is like basically war.
That's
like,
a loss.
That's the loss.
Very last.
Yeah.
Adding.
Okay, go ahead, man. And then Eddie's the last one, because people get ready.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Adding to that, I mean, it reminds me again of a really good discussion where we're like, the election of Trump and the Trump movement can be greater than itself, similar to how independence for the colonial struggles was not just a thing in itself. It's a means for the people to assume responsibility for their country, elevate their capacity to govern and have a say in their lives. The point of getting Trump elected, although it is one, of course, to weaken the state, but hopefully that process, and after he's in office, there can be greater participation of the American people in their nation.
Yeah, and that's, well, I guess we'll spend the whole, most of the preschool in the next few weeks on this question. Okay, folks, I guess we can prepare to go.
Okay.
I know I'm tired and hungry. Okay.
Thanks everyone for tuning in on the live stream. Also, I'm just thanking everyone who tuned in and added comments on the live stream. No, I was just saying goodbye.
Bye.
But anyways, bye everyone.